A very good morning to all of you. Welcome to the session on science and technology. Before we start, just as usual, please give me a confirmation if the audio and video are working fine for you. Great, wonderful. All right. So we were in the chapter of energy, and in energy we had discussed about coal, petroleum, and we had discussed about all the other non-renewable sources. And then we had started our discussion on the renewable sources, where we had discussed about solar energy and we discussed about wind energy. Continuing from there, the next source of energy for us is geothermal energy. Now, in case of geothermal energy, how exactly do we define what is geothermal? Look at the word. The word is geothermal energy. Now, when we look at this, if you break down this word, you have two, that is geo and thermal. What is geo associated with? Thermal we had discussed yesterday also. Thermal comes from therm, which is about heat, right? So this is about heat. And what about geo? Yes, as some of you have mentioned, that this is something that corresponds to the earth. That's why when we say geothermal energy, it corresponds to the energy that is there stored inside the earth, all right? Where the source is, the origin is inside the earth. In that case, though, that kind of energy source can be called as geothermal energy. Now, in case of geothermal energy, so that's why how to define it? It is the heat energy of the earth, and there are a couple of sources from where it can come. For first, simply is the earth stores a lot of heat inside, just from the fact that when it was created. From there on, we have seen that the core of the earth, you might know that the core of the earth is very hot, and the temperature there is very high. So, for example, as you see here, that as we go towards the center of the earth, the temperature keeps on increasing and it can be as high as 5000 degrees Celsius. So the temperature that we have at the center of the earth, at the core of the earth, that is something that corresponds to the heat that sometimes comes on the surface. Now, when such a heat comes to the surface, this is something that can become geothermal energy. That is one. Then decay of radioactive elements is another reason. But what we mean by the decay of radioactive elements, we'll discuss about this when we go to the our discussion on nuclear energy. Then we'll have a discussion on it. So not right now, not right now, right? We'll discuss it later. So in this manner, we understand that this is how we look at geothermal energy. So the basics are that this is the heat of the earth, the heat that is there inside the earth, where the origin of the heat is inside the earth. Now, this heat that we have, the trapped heat inside the earth, it can come to the surface with the help of certain reservoirs. So, for example, we have geysers, we have hot springs, we have the boiling mud pots, we have volcanoes. All these can become the source of releasing this heat that is trapped inside the earth towards the surface. So, this is how the heat would come to the surface with the help of these reservoirs. Now, in this kind of a scenario, when we look at all these geothermal reservoirs, they become the source, and there are various ways in which we can get the energy from these sources. There are three major different types of plants that we have here that can lead to the generation of geothermal energy. So we have dry steam power plant, we have flash steam power plant, and we have binary cycle plants. So these are the three different types of power plants that can help us in generating geothermal energy. So what exactly is the basic working principle behind these three? Let's try to understand that first. So the first one that we have here is dry steam power plant. Now in case of dry steam power plant, what happens is, if you look at this particular picture, this will give you an idea about the entire structure of the work. So this is where you have the reservoir, right? This is where you have the reservoir, and from this reservoir, we are getting the heat. So this heat that is there in the reservoir, it has a high temperature. So what then happens is, from there on, what we see is that the steam that is there, you'll see that here, these kind of sources, you will have steam, and this steam that we have here, this steam will come to the surface. All right, this steam comes to the surface, and this steam directly will go towards the turbine. And while this steam goes towards the turbine, it will help in the rotation of the turbines. So once the rotation of the turbines happen, you'll see that this is something that will lead to the generation of electricity. And the leftover that we have, I mean, the heat, after the heat has been used, what we see is that we use a condenser, and with the help of this condenser, the work of condenser is that this steam will be converted to liquid water. So once this steam is converted to liquid water, again it goes back to the reservoir. Now at the reservoir, obviously the temperature is very high because it is the source of heat. So that's why the temperature here is very high, and hence what happens is that this water again converts into steam, and then again as steam, it comes back to the turbine, rotates the turbine, electricity generation happens. Then liquid water through condenser again goes back to the reservoir, gets converted into steam, and this is a cycle that continues. So that's why we are saying that it works by piping hot steam from underground reservoirs directly into the turbines from the geothermal reservoirs, and this is something that powers the generators to provide the electricity. So in this manner we see, and finally after that the steam condenses, and this is where we are using condenser to do that. So and then into water, and is piped back into the earth via, okay, this is via the injection wells. Injection well, it has gotten hidden behind this diagram. So in this manner we see that this cycle keeps on continuing, and we are able to get energy from here. Another way of doing this is with the help of flash steam power plant. Now, when it comes to flash steam power plant, there is a slight difference in the working of flash steam power plant, and this difference is able to provide a better efficiency. So compared to dry steam power plant, what we see is that flash steam power plant is able to provide better efficiency in production, in electricity generation. So now what we see is that in this scenario, instead of directly this steam coming to the surface, or directly it coming to the turbine, we see that there's a slight difference here in which it works, and this is where we see that the reservoir that you have. So what happens is that you have the reservoir here, right? You have the reservoir here, and from the reservoir, we see that we at this point we maintain high pressure. Right? At this point, we see that we maintain high pressure. Now, because we are maintaining high pressure, is everything fine? Just give me one moment. Just give me one moment. All's good now. Can you just confirm if audio video is fine? Okay, wonderful. Yeah. So what I was saying is that in dry steam power plant, what we know is that in dry steam power plant, the steam will directly come to the turbine. Correct. Now in this scenario, what we do is that we maintain high pressure. We maintain high pressure here, and because of high pressure, the steam will be in liquid form. So instead of having steam at high temperature, so what happens is, just to give you a basic principle, when you are at normal pressure, all right, normal pressure that we maintain everywhere, normal atmospheric pressure, at normal atmospheric pressure at 100 degrees Celsius, water would boil, right? Water would boil and water converts into steam. But if let's say you are maintaining high pressure, pressure that is higher than atmospheric pressure, then at even high temperature, you can maintain water in its liquid state. That even if you are at 120 degrees Celsius, 150 degrees Celsius, 170, 80 degrees Celsius, even then water would not convert into steam, water would retain its liquid state. And it can trap all the heat. I mean, it can absorb more heat, and that's why overall efficiency increases. So what happens is that if let's say you had the same water in its steam form at high temperature, then it would absorb less heat, and the same water at high temperature will absorb more heat. All right. So in this manner, we see that uh, this liquid state that we maintain, the liquid state will be able to absorb more heat, and hence it will be able to improve the efficiency of working of this particular power plant. So now from here on, what happens is that it goes to the flash tank. It goes to the flash tank. All right. This part is called as the flash tank. Now at flash tank, there is normal pressure. There's normal pressure. So as soon as it comes from high pressure to normal pressure, this water would convert into steam. So this sudden conversion that happens because of the pressure difference, there's a sudden conversion that happens. So that sudden conversion is called as flashing into steam. The sudden conversion is called as flashing into steam. So it flashes into steam and goes to a turbine, rotates the turbine, and same electricity is produced. From there on, we see that it again goes back to the surface. So you have liquid water. Again, with the help of a condenser, you have liquid water that goes back, and this continues. So just remember this one basic thing. All right, I'm just writing it out here as well. At high pressure, water remains liquid even above the boiling point, and also has a higher capacity to absorb heat thus increasing the efficiency. Right? Thus increasing the efficiency. So this is basically what we see here, and that's the basic principle behind working of the flash steam power plant. So flash tank basically has a lower temperature and a lower pressure. All right, flash tank has a lower pressure. So this basically is low pressure. So flash tank is at a lower pressure, and hence we see that this kind of a conversion happens here. Then after this, we have something called as binary cycle plant. Now, here the word is binary. Why binary? Because there are two cycles running here. That's why binary. So now binary cycle plants are very special because first of all, compared to the other two plants, it has a better efficiency. And it's not only about efficiency, but there is something unique that we know about binary cycle plants. And this is about a report that was published by IPCC. What is IPCC, anyone? What's IPCC? What is IPCC? Yes. Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, right? Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change. Now, in case of IPCC, what is the role of IPCC? What does IPCC do? What does IPCC do? Formulates reports on climate change. Yes, that is correct. Studies the reports published by various organizations. That's correct. Yeah, coordination in climate change efforts and multiple reports. That's good. Yeah. So when it comes to IPCC, the role of IPCC is that IPCC would publish reports from time to time with regards to the various factors related to climate change. And let's say there are reports or scientific studies that have been published by various organizations or various governments or whatever it is. So all those studies that have been done, they would comprehend all those studies and they would publish reports based on that. And there would be comprehensive reports that they publish from time to time. So for example, you might have heard of the reports that they publish. For example, most famously, there is something called as the assessment reports. Last year, for example, they had brought out the sixth assessment report, and before that, there was a fifth assessment report back in 2014. So after 2014, directly in 2022, a very comprehensive report has come. But before, in between, we see that from time to time they keep publishing certain reports. In one of those reports that they had published, they basically had done a research or they had studied the various renewable energy sources. Various renewable energy sources, meaning solar energy, wind energy, geothermal energy, all these different sources that we have. And in that study, what they had mentioned is that binary cycle plants are the cleanest of all the renewable energy sources, not only among geothermal energy sources, but rather across the stream. So that's why binary cycle plant, according to IPCC, according to the IPCC report, binary cycle plants are the cleanest renewable energy plant. Right? So binary cycle plants are the cleanest according to them. So that's why we see that in all those cases, even compared to solar energy or even compared to wind energy, even when we compare it to all these sources also, we see that binary cycle plants actually are cleaner than that. So that's why binary cycle plants were in use because of it. Now, in case of binary cycle plants, what's happening, just understand this, that here you have two different liquids running simultaneously. All right, there are two different liquids running simultaneously. One, the steam that is coming from inside, right? The steam that is coming from inside, and this comes in contact with another liquid, right? This comes in contact with another liquid. Now this liquid will be largely an organic liquid. This liquid largely will be an organic liquid, and this organic liquid generally will have a lower boiling point. We had discussed this yesterday as well, that the organic liquids have lower boiling points. So what we see here is that we use something like an isobutene, or even isopentane is used, or normal pentane is used. So there are a lot of different types of organic liquids that can be used in the second cycle. So there are two independent cycles running. Now, because what happens is that the heat that you have inside the air, that is at a higher temperature, as soon as it comes in contact, with the second liquid. The second liquid also gets heated up and it converts into its gaseous form. So this isobutene, for example, isobutene will be there in the second cycle. It will convert into its gaseous form, and then it will be taken to the flash. It will be taken to the turbine. So as soon as it goes to the turbine, again the same process, and it will be in its liquid form, coming back here, again coming in contact with the steam or the heat that is coming from inside the earth, and it will continue. So overall, again here also we see that the efficiency is very high, and not only the fact that efficiency is high, but also we see that it becomes very clean source of energy. So that's the whole idea. That this is basically what we try to do in binary cycle plants. That there are two parallel cycles that are running. One, the steam from inside the earth, from the reservoir, and second, of an organic liquid that has a lower boiling point than water. Now, coming to geothermal energy in India, what we understand is that in India there are certain areas that have been marked. So, for example, these areas. Now, these are the areas. These are the areas where we have been able to isolate the areas where we can find geothermal energy source. Now, out of all these, there are certain sources that have been seen to be good sources, and we have been trying to understand it. We are trying to see how much of energy generation is possible. Some pilot projects have been taken already. There are some government projects that have started running, and there are other areas that have been marked. So, overall, when it comes to, if you understand the Indian perspective, there is an estimate that we could produce up to 10 gigawatt of power. Right? Its estimate is that India has a capacity or potential of up to 10 gigawatt of power in geothermal energy, and Geological Survey of India has identified up to 340 geothermal energy hot springs which can be utilized for geothermal energy. Now, out of this, what we see is that there are certain initiatives that have been taken. So, for example, in 2021, there is an MOU that was signed between ONGC and Ladakh. All right, between ONGC and Ladakh, they basically signed an MOU that in the Puga Valley, right, in the Puga Valley, ONGC will start the construction of its geothermal energy power plant. Right? It will start the construction of its geothermal energy power plant, and it will set up a power plant that will take care of the local needs. So the electricity generation that will be done here, this electricity generation will be useful in nearby areas of in Ladakh where electricity supply right now has not reached. So in those kind of areas, they will provide an energy source with the help of this power plant. So that is the first thing. Then after that, what we see is that last year, Geothermal Core of Texas, a US-based company, it also has signed a letter of intent to invest rupees 820 crores in producing geothermal energy in just Uttar Pradesh. So they signed an agreement. They signed a letter of intent with the government of Uttar Pradesh that a total of 820 crore investment will be made in understanding these geothermal energy reservoirs and using them for electricity generation. So that's why this is what we see from the perspective of India. Now, overall, looking at the advantages and the disadvantages of geothermal energy, the advantages again, they are more or less self-explanatory. That it's a renewable source, it's a sustainable source, it's environmentally friendly, it's a constant supply. Now, this is a very, very important point, because in case of both solar energy and in case of wind energy, in both the cases we discussed this problem that you do not have a constant supply, right? You do not have a constant supply. So, for example, in case of solar energy, we know that at night you cannot produce it, and in case of wind energy, we discussed that there is a fluctuation that always happens in wind. So that's why you do not have a guarantee of how much energy will actually be produced, and that's why there might not be a constant supply of energy, which is not the problem. Which is not a problem with geothermal, because geothermal energy will always have a constant supply from the heat source where we are trapping the heat. Then it has a small footprint. So small footprint because on the ground there is nothing that we are doing. Most of the installations are done underground. Then it also can become cost effective. We see that although initial investment could be on the higher side, but overall on a long term basis it becomes cost effective. The maintenance requirements are low noise or nothing as such compared to the others. Then this also helps in increasing the energy security, something that we have discussed with the other sources as well, helps in employment generation and has a huge potential. So we understand all these points and how exactly these points will be useful for us, right? So that's why in case of geothermal energy, these are some of the advantages that we have with geothermal energy. Now, in case of some of the problems that we have, one problem could be that it has a geographical limitation, that not all the areas are equipped with geothermal energy reservoirs. There are certain areas, mostly you'll see that these areas run along the tectonic lines. And so, for example, let's say in case of India also, if you consider, we know that the tectonic lines in India, they run like this. Right? This is the part where the tectonic lines run. So that's why this is the part where the number of geothermal energy reservoirs are the highest. But that's why it is very much geography dependent, because you cannot guarantee what areas will have geothermal energy and what areas wouldn't. Then investment requirements are huge, because first and foremost we have to find the areas, we have to look at the commercial viability of the areas, we also have to find what kind of plant is suitable for that area. A lot of survey needs to happen for understanding how big or small the actual reservoir is. So there are a lot of these kind of issues that we have, because of which we see that this can lead to a lot of investment requirements. Then there are chances of environmental impacts as well, that in many of these cases there are chances that hydrogen sulfide gas could be a byproduct, because these areas, you might know that these areas have a lot of sulfur. Right? These areas have a lot of sulfur, so that's why from there on we are talking about that formation of hydrogen sulfide is possible. Then there are some sustainability concerns as well, that whether these sources are sustainable or not, whether they can be here for a very long time or not. So we do see that there are all these kinds of concerns, that the source that we have chosen, whether the source is going to last, for a long time or not, is something that is also a concern for us. And also in case of dry steam power plant, many times it is possible that dry steam power plant also wastes a lot of energy. So those kind of areas of concern we have. And then seismic instability. Now when we say seismic instability, there have been a couple of instances. One was there in the US and there was another one in Switzerland. Now in both the cases of US and Switzerland, there was a small earthquake. Right? There was a very small earthquake. On Richter scale it was hardly 3.7, 3.8, so on. So In case of seismic instability, what we see is that these two areas, one in US, one in Switzerland, there was a small earthquake, and then when they looked at the epicenter of this earthquake and the potential reasons behind this earthquake, they concluded that the geothermal energy power plant that's situated in that area would have been one of the key reasons for this kind of earthquake to happen. Because these already are, I mean, we discussed that most of them, because geographical limitation. Why? Because most of them, they run along the tectonic lines, right? So these are areas which anyway are these are areas which are already susceptible to seismic movements, and that's why there are higher chances of earthquakes. Anyway, now that we start getting energy from here, extracting energy from here, that also can lead to some kind of instability, and that's why seismic instability is also a possible problem with geothermal energy. So right now, with regards to geothermal energy, it's not that we are doing a lot. There are some pilot projects here and there that have started, some foreign companies that have started to invest, some foreign companies that have started to come to India. So we see that there are all these things, and that's why for the future, this is going to be an important source. Now, coming to bioenergy. Now, bioenergy, and this is where we basically will be using biofuels to derive bioenergy. So, first and foremost, any question from whatever we have discussed until now? If there's anything that you want to ask. Why high pressure at flash steam power plant? See, as I told you, that when you are at high pressure would mean that you can maintain the liquid state of water and absorb more heat while doing that. So that's why even if it is at 150, 160 degrees Celsius, it will be at it will be still in the liquid state, and by being in the liquid state, it will be able to get more heat from there. It will be able to absorb more heat. So that's why its efficiency increases. Flash tank have low pressure, then how the flash tank attract the steam from the earth? I mean, we are sending it there. We are directly sending it there. It's not that it is attracting. We have made a mechanism that it will move towards the flash tank. How come H2S? H2S because these are areas where sulfur sources are present. You'll find that wherever you have hot springs, you'll find that they are good sulfur sources, and that's why hydrogen sulfide gas is a potential. We found a new form of oxygen yesterday. Can we use it in any form of energy? We still have to find it, because see that, because it's a very huge development that there is some oxygen molecule out there, atom out there, where you have just 8 protons and you have 20 neutrons. So that's why it's a very unique thing to even observe, because usually what happens is that there will be this much of difference between the number of protons and neutrons is common in very heavy elements, like let's say uranium, plutonium, etc. For them, it's common. But for such a lightweight material, like lightweight element like oxygen, to have such a stark difference between the number of protons and number of neutrons, that number of neutrons is almost 2.5 times, right? It is 2.5 times the number of protons. So that's very unique. So we have to see whether or if there is anything that we can do with it. How is it determined which type of plant works well? See, usually what we see is that our preference has been flash steam power plant, because for flash steam power plant is an easier installation and an efficient installation. So flash steam has been one of the primary used plants. Dry steam power plants are the ones which have been older, because the first power plant to be set up in geothermal, the first power plants were all dry steam power plants. So that's why dry steam are the older ones. Usually we see that today dry steam is lesser. Flash steam power plants are more, and binary cycle plants only in few cases. Please explain the binary process. The binary process is simple, that the heat that is coming from inside the earth, it follows its own cycle, and it comes in contact with another liquid, which is an organic liquid with lower boiling point. So because it has a lower boiling point, it's easier for us to convert it into steam and hence take it to the turbine. The flash tank is at a much lower temperature, causing the fluid to quickly flash into steam. What? Okay, so this basically flashing into steam is nothing but the sudden conversion. The sudden conversion from liquid to steam is called as flashing into steam. Any scheme for bioenergy? Just wait, we have not started. We'll discuss about that. Right. So let's continue. So now the next source for us is bioenergy. Now, in case of bioenergy, we are saying that this is bioenergy, meaning that this is energy of biological origin. Right? It is energy of biological origin, and usually this is derived from something called as biomass. So what do we mean by biomass? Let's try to understand that first. So biomass basically is any biological material which is derived from living or recently living organisms. Right? Derived from living or recently living organisms. So from there on, the biological material that we derive, it is called as biomass. So it could be a plant-based biomass, it could be an animal-based biomass, it could be a microbial biomass as well. So it could be any kind of biomass. So just anything that is living or recently living. So now when we use this biomass for energy purposes, for generation of energy, we would say that it is bioenergy. So now in case of bioenergy, so there can be various sources. For example, fuel, wood, livestock manure, municipal waste, energy crops, etc. So especially, for example, let's say when we say that something is an energy crop, the meaning of energy crop is that it's a good source of carbohydrates. Good source of carbohydrates. So that's why they will be called as energy crops, because that's the role of carbohydrates, correct? What does carbohydrate do? Can you tell me what is the role of carbohydrates in our body? Energy, yeah, correct. So as most of you have written, that the most important work that it does is to provide energy, right? Carbohydrates will provide energy to the body. So that's why these kind of crops, which are good sources of carbohydrates, they're also called as energy crops. That's the reason why they're also called as energy crops, because these are sources which are good sources of energy. So now, because they are good sources of energy for us, they will be good sources of energy production as well, right? So that's why these kind of crops can actually be used as a source for bioenergy, as a source for generation of bioenergy. Now, overall, when it comes to this, all these crops and everything that can be used for energy generation, they will be called as feedstock. So just remember that feedstock is nothing but the raw material. So feedstock is nothing but the raw material that is being used, and this raw material basically is called as feedstock. So now raw material could be anything. Anything from where we can derive energy will be called as feedstock. Now talking about the biofuel, and just to repeat everything that we have discussed so that there's no confusion, we have bioenergy, we have energy crops, biomass, feedstock, and biofuel. Correct? So just try to understand this. Just try to understand these terms again, so that there's no confusion as such. Yeah. So bioenergy. What is bioenergy? That energy that you have from biological origin. Energy that comes from biological origin, we say that it is bioenergy. Then after that, energy crops. What are energy crops? Crops which are good sources of carbohydrates, and that's why they can also be used as a source of bioenergy. So that's why energy crops. Biomass. What is biomass? The biological material. The biological material that we derive from plants or animals which are living or recently living. Feedstock. What is feedstock? The raw material. Anything that any biomass that we want to use for the generation of bioenergy will be called as feedstock. And then after that, lastly, the term biofuel. So now, in case of biofuel, biofuel also is a hydrocarbon based fuel, right? This is also a hydrocarbon based fuel produced from organic matter meaning plants and animals. So now the question is, biofuel is also a hydrocarbon based fuel. Fossil fuels like petroleum also, they also are hydrocarbon based fuel. What is the basic difference? What is the basic difference between petroleum and biofuel? Yes, Chaitanya, your answer is correct. Yeah, Akula, you are also correct. Yashpal, you are right. Shally, you're right. So you understand now. So basic difference, understand this, that the basic difference is time. The basic difference is time, because fossil fuels take millions of years, right? They are hydrocarbon based. Petroleum, for example, petroleum is hydrocarbon based, but it takes millions of years to form. Whereas biofuel takes days, weeks, or maybe months. That's it. So that's why there's a stark difference between how much time it takes versus how much time fossil fuels take. And then there are others. For example, let's say in case of fossil fuels, we know that they are highly polluting, whereas biofuels have been seen to be much more cleaner as compared to fossil fuels. So although they are hydrocarbon based, but the amount of emissions in case of biofuels is very, very less as compared to the emissions that happen with fossil fuels. So in all these cases, we see that these are the ways in this is something which is there. So that's why it is produced in a short period of time. Biofuel is produced in a short period of time. So this is how we basically define any biofuel. Now, when it comes to biofuel, there are three major types of biofuel that we use: bioethanol, biodiesel, and biogas. So what exactly do we mean by them? Let's try to understand this first. So first and foremost, before we go to the different types of biofuel, there is one way in which we always classify biofuels, and that is on the basis of generations. So as you can see, that there is something called as first generation, second generation, third, and the fourth generation of biofuel. So what exactly they are? Let's try to understand that. That when we say that something is a first generation biofuel, what it means is that this is food crop based. It is food crop based. Now, when we say food crop based, meaning that the source for first generation biofuel is some kind of food crop. So it could be any one of the vegetable oils, it could be sugarcane, it could be corn, it could be soybean, it could be many others like this. So what we know is that we are using some kind of food crop, and not only any food crop, any these will be food crops which are good sources of carbohydrates. Right? These are good sources of carbohydrates. So that's the first generation. The second generation, what we see is that there are some slight changes that we see here. First, that we use wastes here, and these wastes could be agricultural waste or it could be municipal waste. Right? So either agricultural waste or municipal waste, both could be used. Now when it comes to second generation biofuel is where we also can use non-edible crops. So basically, crops which are not food crops, they can also be used as a source in the second generation. And overall, when it comes to second generation biofuel is also called as advanced biofuel. Second generation biofuel is also called as advanced biofuel. And why we call them as advanced biofuel? The main reason is that the technology requirement here is little difficult to implement. It's not easy to implement, and that is the reason why it is called as advanced biofuel. Now, in case of advanced biofuel, second generation, we are saying that it's advanced biofuel. Third generation biofuel. In case of third generation biofuel, it could either be algae based or something called as bio CNG in India. Bio CNG. So we'll discuss about bio CNG later. So it can be algae based or biofuel. Sorry, bio CNG. Now algae based. This is a very, very important segment, the third generation biofuel, because we see that algae based biofuel is something that is being chased by the world for at least a decade now. At least for last 10 years, we know that we have been chasing algae to understand how algae can become important for us. Because experimentally we have succeeded with them. But commercially, until now, we have not been able to make them viable. We have not been able to use them commercially at a large scale. So that is one major problem that we have here. That when it comes to the third generation biofuels, especially the algae-based biofuel is where we have been putting a lot of effort, and also understand why are we putting so much of effort? What are the advantages that we have with algae-based biofuel? Let's try to understand that first. So when it comes to algae-based biofuel, the first point is that it grows underwater. Right? That's the first point, that it grows underwater. Now, because it grows underwater, there is no competition for land resources. Because the main problem that we have with the first generation biofuel is that here you are using food crops. So now, let's say if you are using corn, let's say you are using corn or sugarcane, for example. So Now the cultivation of sugarcane that is being done, whether the cultivation of sugarcane is being done for to be used as a food crop, or is it being done so that it could be used as a biofuel? It's both are possible. So basically, for the same piece of land, both these activities will be fighting. But in case of algae, because algae grows underwater, there is no fight for resources. Correct? There is no fight, or you can say no competition. No competition for resources. That is one. Then apart from that, one thing more that you see is that their energy density is high, or let me write energy efficiency. They have high energy efficiency. Now, what do we mean by this point? This point basically means that, let's say, for example, if you take a normal food crop, then food crop based biofuels, they would have somewhere around, let's say, 40% of efficiency, or maybe 35% of efficiency. Compared to that, we see that they show more efficiency. I mean, algae show more efficiency, meaning that, let's say, 1 kg of algae, 1 kg of algae will give you more amount of heat as compared to 1 kg of, let's say, corn, or 1 kg of sugarcane, etc. Compared to that, 1 kg of algae will give you more energy. So that's again a very, very important point, and that's why we are saying that it is having higher energy efficiency. Now, apart from that, one more point about algae is that they grow fast. Algae grow fast. So growing fast means that they will be available to you as a source much quicker as compared to the food crop based points. Now, overall, what happens here is that, let's say, if you consider any food crop, the growth of food crop will take some time. Correct? The growth of food crop will take some time before it can be made ready for your consumption. So for example, let's say it could take a month, it could take a couple of months, and then the processing will happen so that it could be used as a fuel. So in all these cases, it could take, let's say, easily it could take 1 to 2 months of time. But whereas when it comes to algae, algae basically is algae can grow very fast, and within a week, within 10 days of time, we'll see that algae will be ready. Algae will be available, so that now production of biofuel can happen from there. So that's why we see that they grow very fast. So they grow very fast, they have higher energy efficiency, and there is no competition for resources. And that's why algae-based biofuel is set to be the future. It's set to be the future. Experimentally, we already have achieved success here, but we are still finding ways in which commercially it can be made a success. So that is where we are actually still lagging behind. And I mean, it's something which is very, very advanced and not very easy to get energy from. And that's why we see that there are so many studies and so many research, etc., that have been happening here. And then we have the fourth generation. Now, remember that when it comes to the fourth generation, in most of the documents of various different countries where they have their own biofuel policy, you'll see that fourth generation more or less is not used as a term. Right? Fourth generation is not a term that we use very often. It is more of an experimental stage. Okay? It is more at an experimental stage where we are trying to figure out what should be our fourth generation. Okay, one more point to add here. It is also less polluting. It is also less polluting. Right? Less polluting as compared to the first generation and the second generation. Right? So as compared to first and the second generation, we see that they are less polluting. Now, in this scenario also, when it comes to the fourth generation, they have to be the cleanest. And for that, we have to find the source. That if we think of what the source would be here, so source could be either microorganisms. Source could be either microorganisms or genetically modified organisms, or we could also use the second generation sources. Second generation source with carbon sequestration. Carbon sequestration. So any idea what is carbon sequestration? Anyone who can tell me first? What do we mean by carbon sequestration? Storage of carbon, capturing of carbon, basically both. Storing and capturing carbon. All right. So why we are saying second generation source with carbon sequestration? Because second generation source would produce some carbon dioxide. So whatever carbon dioxide is being emitted by the second generation process, that carbon dioxide can be captured and stored. So that capturing and storing of carbon dioxide is what we are talking about. Right. So carbon sequestration. This is the storage and capture of carbon dioxide. Right. So carbon sequestration is being used here. Now overall, when it comes to carbon sequestration, this will be used so that it becomes a cleaner source of energy for us. The whole idea behind this is, the whole idea behind the fourth generation is that it should be the cleanest among the four generations. The cleanest among the four generations. So that is basically what we see with the fourth generation. So right now it is at an experimental stage. Right? It is at an experimental stage, and it is something that we want to change. And maybe in the future, if we find something concrete where commercially it will be viable, then in that case it perhaps will become a part of our discussion more. Because until then, what we see is that it's more of an experiment right now, and largely that's why the policy documents of various different countries mention more of the first three generations only, not the fourth. Now coming to the different types of biofuel, we discussed that there are three major types of biofuel. You have bioethanol, you have biodiesel, and then there is biogas. So these are the three which are the most common ones. So first, for example, we have biodiesel. Now in case of biodiesel, what we see is that biodiesel will be produced from vegetable oils, or what you call as oil seeds. So they will be produced from oil seeds, and this will undergo a process called as esterification. It will undergo the process of esterification and produce biodiesel. And this biodiesel can be blended with, or it can completely replace diesel. Right? Either you can blend it with diesel, or you can completely replace diesel with biodiesel if that's a possibility for you. So largely from oil seeds and esterification. Then after that, in case of the second one, which is bioethanol, in case of bioethanol, it comes from sources like sugar beet or sugar cane, corn, etc. Largely you'll see that the energy crops will be useful here. the energy crops could be useful here. They go under the process of fermentation, and after fermentation, bioethanol is formed. So this bioethanol either can be blended with, or it can completely replace petrol. So one is for blending with diesel, and the second one is for blending with petrol. So this is how the first two are. So just try to understand some of the key points with regards to biodiesel and bioethanol. So carbon dioxide emission can be reduced by up to 80%. There is no sulfur dioxide being produced in the process. Then up to by 75%, we'll see that even PM 2.5 and PM 10 concentration will also decrease. So by 75%. So pollution wise, you can see that there are a lot of advantages that biodiesel holds for us. But apart from this, it's not only about pollution, but we also see that there are other advantages that we get out of this. So for example, the flash point is at 150 degrees Celsius, meaning that it can catch fire or combustion can begin above 150 degrees Celsius. Whereas in case of petroleum diesel, we see that it is just 70 degrees Celsius. So that's why catching fire, possibility of petroleum diesel catching fire is higher, and possibility of biodiesel catching fire is lower. Alright. So in this manner, we see that this is how it can be utilized. Then apart from that, what we also see is that it can provide significant lubricity as well. That with right kind of additives, it will be able to provide lubricity better as compared to normal diesel. So from their perspective also, we see that this will be able to increase our efficiency altogether. So that's why these are some of the advantages that we have with biodiesel. Now, with respect to biodiesel, there is one source which is very, very important source, right? There's one source that has been in the news, I would say, for the last 20 years, right? Give or take almost 20 years, perhaps a little more than 20 years. And this is the plant called as Jatropha. Now, in case of Jatropha, what we see is that Jatropha is a plant that can be grown very easily. Right? Jatropha is a plant that grows very easily. So, growing them in various different forms or various different conditions is not that difficult. So, for example, whether there's a high rainfall or low rainfall, it can grow. Whether the soil is fertile or maybe not so fertile, it can still grow. So, it can be grown on the sides of the canals, or the sides of the roads, sides of the farms, the boundary of the farms, etc. It can be grown anywhere. So, first thing is fine, it can be grown anywhere. That's a big advantage. Second, that when it comes to Jatropha seeds, or let's say the fruit that Jatropha has, from there on the seeds that are derived, these seeds can be used for biodiesel production. So now this was a big news, and you'll see that there was a lot of excitement that was also generated in India. And this I'm talking, as I told you, that almost more than 20 years back, when we saw when we had the Atal Bihari Vajpayee government and Dr. APJ Abdul Kalam, he was the president. So at that point of time, we see that Jatropha was in the news a lot, because we thought that Jatropha is going to change the energy requirements that we have in India, and it can become a crucial part of the infrastructure. So in case of biodiesel from Jatropha, initially we saw that there was a lot of excitement from the side of the government, so much so that Dr. APJ Abdul Kalam, he had started growing Jatropha in the backyards of the Rashtrapati Bhavan. He basically wanted to show the farmers or people of India that look how easy it is to grow Jatropha. So even you can do that. That you can also use Jatropha. Now, overall, what happens here? Is that although Jatropha is good in this manner, that you can just grow Jatropha wherever you want, and you can get biodiesel from here. When we look at the commercial perspective, is where Jatropha loses out. What happens? The problem, just understand that initially so much excitement was shown that in 2002, 2003, etc., a lot of excitement was shown, and after that, in the next policy of 2009, the 2009 biofuel policy also mentions Jatropha as a source of biodiesel production. Now that all changes later because the initial years when we are talking about early 2000s, or let's say even up to 2010, these were early years where we were still finding out ways in which biofuels can be used. So we were just trying to find out ways in which biofuel could be used, but so that's why these kind of plants, they generated a lot of interest. Later on, when we analyzed Jatropha from commercial perspective, this is where we see that using Jatropha as a primary source is not a viable option for us. It's not a good option for us. Why? Because two things. So we are basically discussing issues with Jatropha. Right? Issues with Jatropha. What are the issues? The first issue that we have is that it takes more time to grow. Right? It takes more time to grow. It can take up to 6 months. Up to 6 months to grow. So that's why getting seeds from here, it will take a lot of time. So that is first thing. Second, energy efficiency is very low. Right? So energy conversion rate is very low, almost like 20, maximum of 25%. So energy efficiency is low. Right? Energy efficiency is low. So only about 20-25% conversion is what happens here. Now understand this, that normally the crops that we are using, these crops, they can have a conversion rate of up to, let's say, 40%, meaning that if you have 100 kg of these crops, almost 40 to 45 kg of biofuel will be produced from here. In case of Jatropha, we see that it's just about 20%. That first of all, you are taking so much time that the seeds can grow, the seeds to be available, it can take up to 6 months of time. Then the processing of fuel will begin. So very easily, it's a 7.5 months process. Now we can't expect to be waiting for 7.5 months for getting the fuel from Jatropha, but because you have these crops, and these crops have been able to do the same work for you within a month, or maybe let's say just 2 months of time, or maybe 1.5 months of time. That's it. So the normal crops, they are taking much far lesser time as compared to Jatropha. So time is a factor and efficiency is a factor. So because of that, what we see is that initially there was so much of excitement that was shown by the government. Not only the government, even UPSC. UPSC also asked a couple of questions from here. And then ever since, the government also has lost interest. They have stopped talking about it. And UPSC also has lost interest. They also have stopped talking about it. So, but biodiesel from Jatropha is a very good case study from the perspective of biodiesel and how biodiesel could be utilized. So now today we see that it's not that it's not being used at all, or we are not using Jatropha anywhere. We do see that Jatropha is still being used, but as an additional source. Initially, we thought that this is what is going to be the primary source for us, and it is going to change the entire landscape of energy in India. But that did not happen with Jatropha. We see that today there are a small number of cases. For example, let's say a few years back, a couple of years back, SpiceJet aircraft, they basically said that now we are going to start making fuel, the jet fuel from Jetrofa. So these are some of the independent research, all right, or independent work. So overall, what we see is that government of India also in the policy now they have added it as an additional source, but it is not being looked upon as a primary source, which was the case almost 20 years back, that we wanted to solve the problems through Jetrofa, and we thought that Jetrofa will completely change the landscape of energy, and especially with regards to diesel. So that did not really happen. Right? That did not really happen. So that was the basic issue that we had with Jetrofa. Coming to bioethanol, now in case of bioethanol also, the emissions, we see that carbon monoxide emission can be reduced by up to 30%, then volatile organic compounds by up to 50%, and nitrogen oxides by up to 35%. So we see that in all these cases, we are able to reduce the various pollutants. At the same time, here also there is no sulfur, so that's why there is no sulfur dioxide. So that again is an added advantage. So overall, we see that it can up to 85% reduction can be done in the total amount of emissions that happen here. So that's why it can really control those emissions from these kind of industries. So that's why bioethanol becomes very, very crucial. Now, a part of bioethanol, a research that is happening is on cellulosic ethanol. Cellulosic ethanol. So cellulosic ethanol is where we are trying to get ethanol or bioethanol from cellulose. So can you tell me what is cellulose? Or let me ask this, that can you tell me where in plants do we find cellulose? In the plant cell, where would you find cellulose? Yeah, a lot of you have given the correct answer. So cellulose in any cell, in any plant cell, you might know that you have something called as a cell wall. Correct? There is something called as cell wall. So this cell wall of a plant cell is where actually cellulose is formed. So now, if we are able to use cellulose, if we can use cellulose again at a commercial scale, if we can use cellulose, it means that now you do not have to be dependent on food crops. We do not have to be dependent on many various specific crops which are good carbohydrate sources and all that. Instead of that, the entire plant kingdom can be used. That you can simply use any agricultural waste or the wood or anything like that can be used for bioethanol production. So that's why if we start using ethanol, if you start using cellulose for ethanol production, the things can change. Again, experiments have happened, we have succeeded, but at a commercial scale, we have not. Now coming to biogas. In case of biogas, we basically are talking about the gas that is produced by breaking down of organic matter in the absence of oxygen. So breakdown of organic matter in the absence of oxygen. Now, in case of biogas also, largely it composes of methane. Largely in case of biogas also, we see that it has methane, and then apart from methane, there can be small mix of other gases as well. Now, in case of biogas, we are saying that it is happening by the breakdown of organic matter in the absence of oxygen. How exactly do we do that? With the help of this particular setup. So all the waste, etc., they will be first collected, and this goes to something called as an anaerobic digester. Now, in the anaerobic digester, anaerobic means what? Anaerobic means what? Anaerobic means what? Absence of oxygen. That if there is no oxygen, then in that case it is called as anaerobic. So we are saying that we have limited or cut off the oxygen scenario or oxygen presence here. So now what happens is that in the absence of oxygen, the decomposition starts, and with this decomposition, methane will be released. Right? Methane will be released, and this methane will be there in this gas holder, and from there on, it will either be used as a domestic fuel, right? Either it will be used as domestic fuel, or it can be used for power generation as well. So in whatever capacity we want, we know that we can use it in that capacity. So that is how biogas works. That in the absence of oxygen, in the limited supply of oxygen, the anaerobic digestion of the organic matter happens. From there on, the gases that are produced, these are biogas. These are largely based on methane. Now, when it comes to biogas, so that's why there is methane that we have. There can be small amount of carbon dioxide or even hydrogen sulfide, moisture, etc. They all can be present, but largely it is methane. Up to 75%. Up to 75% is just methane. Right? Up to 75% is just methane in this biogas. So overall biogas, you can say that it is more or less methane. Now, in case of biogas, what we understand is that there is one major advantage. There is one major advantage that biogas has, and this is in terms of climate change. Now, understand this. Understand this point. We know that there are other advantages. The normal advantages that we discussed with others. For example, it is environmentally friendly, it is a sustainable source, the return on investment is good, a lot of potential is there, a lot of new employment generation is happening. So all those points that we discussed with others, they anyway are applicable here. But there is one major advantage that biogas has, and this is how it is going to help in reduction of global climate change. So just understand this, that what happens. So for example, let's say we know that in case of biogas production, any animal waste or agricultural waste, etc., will be taken to the digester, where the anaerobic conditions will help in production of biogas. Now, let's say even if, for example, even if we talk about animal waste, let's say for example cow dung. So even if let's say something like a cow dung is just left like that, naturally also we know that decomposition will happen. Correct? If you have seen cow dung and if you observe it for 10 days, then you'll see that within 10 days it will almost vanish. Have you seen it? That a complete decomposition happens. Yeah. So many of you have seen it. So there's no need to just stand there and keep observing it. If at all you are into that, please don't do it. But overall, you know what I mean, right? That within let's say 7 to 10 days of time, we'll see that the normal decomposition process would take place, and this decomposition process will anyway take care of the waste decomposition. But understand one problem here: that when this natural decomposition happens, this natural decomposition also becomes a big source of methane. So when this kind of scenario happens, it will completely be decomposed. But while decomposing, a lot of methane will be released from here. Whereas when it comes to let's say using it as biofuel, when you use it as biofuel, then the emission of methane does not happen. Instead, emission of carbon dioxide happens. Right? Understand this. Right? Understand this. That normal decomposition, we know that it will release methane. In case of anaerobic digestions that we are looking at, we see that it does not release methane, but rather it releases carbon dioxide. So see, what happens is that you have methane biofuel, as we discussed that biofuel largely is methane. So in case of this methane, in case of methane that you have in the biogas, when the combustion happens, combustion basically is a kind of an oxidation process. We had discussed this, that combustion cannot happen without oxygen. So now this happens, and this leads to this. Okay, this leads to this. So normal decomposition, methane is released. Biogas, carbon dioxide is released. Now methane, just remember this, that methane as a greenhouse gas is far worse than carbon dioxide. Right. So I'm just highlighting certain things here. This will be released with normal decomposition. Okay, with normal decomposition, whereas carbon dioxide released in combustion of biogas. Okay, so in this case, what is happening is that instead of releasing methane, now we are releasing carbon dioxide. And what is the advantage here? That carbon dioxide is, as a greenhouse gas, carbon dioxide is far less worse as compared to methane. The problem with carbon dioxide is the volume in which we produce carbon dioxide. But let's say if it was a choice between 1 kg of carbon dioxide and 1 kg of methane, I would always choose 1 kg of carbon dioxide instead of 1 kg of methane, because 1 kg of methane will be far worse. It will be far more damaging. It can be almost up to, I mean, normally we see that over a 1 year period, it is up to 25 times, 25 times more potent as a greenhouse gas as compared to carbon dioxide. It could be as high as 80 times. So that's why it warms the atmosphere almost by 25% time, 25 times more as compared to carbon dioxide. So that's why we understand that methane is a bigger problem. The problem with carbon dioxide is the volume in which we are emitting carbon dioxide today. So otherwise, it would always be better if that was not the case. Now, coming to the National Policy on Biofuel of 2018. Any question until now? Any question, anyone? High energy efficiency, please explain. High energy efficiency, please explain once more. So what we are saying is that, let's say if you have 100 grams of algae versus 100 grams of a food crop, this 100 grams of algae will give you more energy as compared to 100 grams of the food crop. That is what we mean by high energy efficiency. Why we call fourth generation biofuel as second generation source with carbon sequestration and not first? See, overall, we don't want to use first generation because first generation is based on food crops. So even in the fourth generation, if we keep using the food crops, then we are not growing. So we would want to completely go away from the food crops, and that's why first generation is not our choice. Space policy was left. Please share with along with ARM. I think I'll check with the team. I'll check with the team whether it has been given or not. Can Jatropha turn into invasive alien species harming the domestic flora? Not so much, because of their growth rates being lower. So that's why it's not a big challenge for us as such. When cow dung is dried and burned, what is released? Methane or carbon dioxide. Methane, while it is being dried up, methane would have been released by then. And when you burn it, then carbon dioxide is released. Please re-explain the second point. What the second point? Are you talking about the advantage second point? Please confirm this. I'm confused. One time you said reduce climate change. Second time release methane. No. So what I'm saying is that in case of having a positive impact on the environment, we know that methane as a greenhouse gas is far worse as compared to carbon dioxide. So that's why releasing methane will never be preferred. We'll always prefer releasing carbon dioxide instead of releasing methane if they are in same amount. The problem I said that today's problem for us is that carbon dioxide has the sheer volume, and that volume methane thankfully doesn't have. Otherwise, if methane was also being released in the same amount as carbon dioxide, then in that case we would be looking at a very different world right now because of the kind of heating that would have happened because of it. Biofuel could be called as renewable source of energy. Yes, because you are plant or animal based, and again for years we can keep doing it. So second point here basically saying this only, that if you look at nitrogen dioxide, it is almost 300 times more potent compared to carbon dioxide, and methane also at least up to 25 times. It can be as high as up to 70 times more than carbon dioxide. So that is what is being explained here. How biofuel contribute to sustainability. So basically the sources is the reason. The source is plant or animal, mostly plants. Now in case of these plants, the plants are going to be here for a very, very long time, and that's why sustainability is what we are talking about. Overall, binary geothermal power plant better than biogas? Yes, of course. Vikas engine was developed based on licensed plan copy or actual income. No, so basically it's not was not based on a copy, but rather the actual engine, and we experimented on the actual engine, the licenses, and all the information about the actual engine was there with India, given to India. Biofuel generated by farms will be there for them personal use or sell it to whom? No, they would be using it. They would be the ones growing it. PPT is not being uploaded. I'll have to check with the team once again. When wild animals die, which kind of energy released? Energy in terms of, I mean, it's the decomposition process, so same methane and carbon dioxide will be released from there. Is the people in the villages burning dry cow dung better than decomposition? Better than decomposition in terms of the fact that you are using it, at least that you are using it and you are finding a fuel source here, but it's a polluting source, so not a great source uh, to be dependent on. But given the scenario that we have in villages, it becomes a good source there. ISRO ready to launch the Aditya L1, and what is the meaning of L1? We discussed this so much. Ashish, I think you were not in the class then, because day before yesterday we have properly discussed this. Geothermal plants, will they cause man-made disasters? Not likely. Even seismicity, we haven't seen seismic activities which are concerning seismic activities. Alright. So, did we discuss bioethanol? Yes, we have discussed bioethanol. L1 basically is Lagrange point 1. Just to give you a basic, L1 is a Lagrange point 1, a point which is between the sun and the earth. It's nearer the sun and it always has an access to the sun, and that's why we use it as a point. Alright. So next up we have the national policy on biofuel of 2018. Now when we look at the national biofuel policy, in 2018 this policy was brought in, and this was not the first policy. Before this we had the 2009 biofuel policy as well. But 2009 biofuel policy, the targets that we had, it never reached the target. It never even reached anywhere near the target as well. So, for example, the 2018 policy talks about 20% blending of ethanol in petrol and 5% blending of biodiesel in diesel to be achieved by 2025. Initially in 2018 it was 2030, and then there was an amendment that was made in 2021, and then this 2030 timeline was brought down to 2025. So that's a very steep target that the government has taken, and that too, I mean, with an amendment they have done it. So now, before this there was a 2009 policy as well, and the 2009 policy, it had laid down the fact that 20% blending of ethanol in petrol would happen by 2017. So it was supposed to happen by 2017, and by 2017 we were sitting at somewhere just 4% blending instead of 20%. So that's why all the targets were there. There was no clear-cut roadmap, and we did not really do a good job there. So then in 2018 a new policy was brought in, and this new policy talked about again the same blending targets. Now there are certain aspects of this that becomes very crucial. So for example, the categorization. That for the first time, categorization into first, second, and third generation has been done. Right? Categorization into first, second, and third generation has been done for the first time. So that also clearly helps us understand what is to be used and where do we get it from, how do we use it, and all these things. Then after that, the scope of raw material. So for the first time, they have properly also defined what kind of raw material can we use in the production of or in the generation of energy through biofuels. So understand the scope of raw material. So scope of raw material. First, we have sugar-based crops. Right? We have sugar-based crops that can be used. For example, let's say something like a sugarcane. Then after that, they have defined starch-based crops. Starch-based crops. So starch-based crops basically are the energy crops. They are the energy crops. So for example, let's say you can take corn as an example. So starch-based crops have been added. Then agricultural waste. Agricultural waste. So in case of agricultural waste, the crop residue you can take as an example. Okay. So crop residue is an example. Then after that, even municipal waste can be used. Municipal waste can also be used. Then after this, there are a couple of very interesting points that have been added here. Now, in case of agricultural waste, let me also add one more thing, that in case of agricultural waste, even things that would be wasted, for example, the crops or the food that will be wasted, that also has been considered here. So, for example, they also had mentioned rotten potatoes. Rotten potatoes. So now, why rotten potatoes? Because obviously potato is a very big source of carbohydrate. So potato obviously can be used as a source, but we don't want to use potato because potato is a very staple food in every part of the country in one form or the other. So that's why if they allow the use of potatoes, then it would mean that some potato that is being grown for consumption, that will probably be diverted towards biofuel production, and that may increase the cost of potato. So that's why they have only mentioned rotten potatoes or broken rice, because rice is also a good source of carbohydrate. So broken rice, the one that is not sold in the market. So broken rice and rotten potatoes. So that's why, and specifically rotten potatoes was mentioned in the policy document. So that's why this inclusion thankfully means that these rotten potatoes, instead of going into your samosas and dosas, it will start going towards biofuel plant. Right. So apart from that, we also see that they also have mentioned surplus crops. Surplus crops. So surplus crops meaning, and we know the problem of surplus crops as well. That many times what happens is that whenever the produce is very high, let's say in a given season the produce is very high, then the farmer loses and farmer would just throw away the extra produce. You might have seen that because what happens is that so much of production has happened that the prices are so low that the farmer gets nothing. So ultimately, that's why we'll see that in these kind of cases, it will just be thrown. It will just be thrown away. So now the government has this policy. As a part of this policy, the government is saying that don't throw it away. Instead of throwing it away, you can sell it to us. That the government will buy the surplus crops from the farmers and pay some amount of money to them. So ultimately, we see that this will also help. This will also help in increasing the farm income. Right? This is something that will also help in increasing the farm income. Then after that, one last thing is used cooking oil. use cooking oil. Now, why use cooking oil has been mentioned here? That first of all, we know that if you have used the same oil over and over again, if you have reheated the same oil 5 times, 6 times, etc., then it can have very serious health implications. Even it is linked with even diseases like cancer. That used cooking oil is very, very bad for health. Now, in your homes, perhaps you still have the control over your oil and how much oil you are using, or how many times are you heating it and all that, but you do not have the same guarantee from the hotels, the restaurants, because you do not know whether they have used the same oil 3 times, 4 times, or 10 times, right? When you even go out to eat in a restaurant, you do not go to the waiter and ask whether you have used the same oil 5 times or whether you have new oil here. You don't do that. And many a times it may so happen, and I'm sure that it does happen at a lot of places, that this oil would have been used 5 times or 4 times, would have been heated multiple number of times. And you would see that. I mean, you just go to roadside vendors and you go to the street shops and wherever, let's say, for example, in the evenings, if in the evening, if they are preparing samosas, just look at the number of times that oil gets heated. So that's not good. That's not good for the health. So now, use cooking oil. Use cooking oil. What the government is saying is that don't use the same oil multiple times. Instead, sell it to us. That we will buy this oil, and there will be agencies all across districts. These agencies can buy the oil from you, and then this oil will be diverted towards biodiesel production plants. So that's why scope of raw material is very, very important to understand, that how all these things have been now properly clarified by the government, that how exactly, what are the sources that we can use, what are the sources that we want to use. Then protection to farmers, and this is basically about the surplus. This is about the surplus and how farmers will be protected against it. Then viability gap funding. Now, what we mean by viability gap funding is that this is a kind of funding. We are talking about an extra amount of budget or extra amount of money in one way or the other being provided to this industry. That is called as viability gap funding. Meaning that, let's say that initial budget was, let's say, 1,000 crores, but 1,000 crores was not enough. We needed an extra 200 crores. So that extra 200 crores will come as a part of the viability gap funding. So viability gap funding is a kind of, you can say, a support, a financial support, whether it is in terms of tax concession, whether it is in terms of subsidies, whether it is in terms of extra money being provided. So in all these kind of cases, we see that viability gap funding can be a major thing, and whatever be the difference in the amount, that difference can be taken care of. And then boost to the biodiesel production. We see that there are multiple steps to be taken so that we can boost the biodiesel production in India. So there are all these things with regards to the national biofuel policy. So when we look at the expected benefits, that what kind of benefits we might have out of this biofuel policy, we understand that there are various aspects of this policy that will be helpful. So for example, reduced biofuel, reduce import dependency. Now, what do we mean by reduced import dependency? We know that we are going to do a blending. So for example, let's say when we are able to reach 20% blending of petrol, of ethanol in petrol all across the country, then in that case what happens then is that instead of whatever be the amount of petrol that we right now are importing, compared to that we'll have to import less. Importing less also would mean that we are spending less, correct? Importing less also means that we are spending less. So whenever we spend, I mean, whenever any international trade happens, it always happens in terms of dollars. So we'll have to waste lesser amount of dollars, and that's why we'll be saving more, and we'll have better forex reserves. We'll have better forex reserves in the country, and that is good for the economy, having better forex reserves. So how much of it can it spend or can it save for us? So for example, let's say when we talk about in terms of data, if you have 1 crore liters of E10 fuel, 1 crore liters of E10 will be able to save rupees 28 crores. Now just remember that in 1 year, the production could be as high as up to 200 to 250 crore liters. So that's why, let's say even if it is 200 crore liters, then the amount of saving that you would be doing would be up to 5,600 crore rupees. So that's an equivalent of 5,600 rupees will be 5,600 crore rupees will be saved. And when we say E10, E10 means that it is ethanol 10, meaning that there is a 10% blending. So E10, meaning of E10 is there is 10% blending. Right? E10 means 10% blending. So that's why reduce in import dependency. Then of course we'll have a cleaner environment, because even in terms of carbon dioxide emission, again if I give you the data, if you have 1 crore liters of E10 fuel, then it saves around 20,000 tons. 20,000 tons of carbon dioxide. 20,000 tons. So just imagine the amount, again, imagine the amount of carbon dioxide emission that can be drastically reduced. Then after that, there are health benefits. So health benefits, for example, we know that, I mean, lesser air pollution, so less pollution, and also in terms of used cooking oil. Then after that, solid waste management, the municipal waste can also be used, so that also adds to the advantage. Then apart from that, we see that there is a chance of infrastructural investment in the rural areas. Now, what we basically see is that, again, if we look at the data, so for example, let's say if we have a power plant that is being set up, which has a capacity of 100 KLPD, that is kiloliters per day, that it has a capacity of 100 kiloliters per day. So 100 kiloliters per day biorefinery, a biorefinery like this, it will need a capital of rupees 800 crores. Right? An investment of 800 crores will be there. So that's why it is a significant amount that we are talking about, and a lot of investment. We are looking in the upwards of more than 10,000 crore rupees of investment that can happen in this sector. Then after this, when it comes to the employment generation part, again, if we talk about the same plant, that if you have a plant which has 100 kiloliters per day capacity, it will be able to give jobs to up to 1,200 people. It can give job to up to 1,000 people. So that's why we see that this is something that will be very, very crucial. And then additional income to the farmers. So additional income to the farmers will be from the perspective of various different things that we are talking about. We are talking about the residues or the waste that will be also used up. So they can sell the residue, crop residue. The burning of crop residue is a big problem now. So that is there. The surplus that they can sell, that is also there. So there are multiple different ways in which farmers can also look towards an additional income. So these are all the expected benefits that we have out of this particular policy. So just remember some of these data, because that can also help you in the examination. Right. So let's take a break here. The time is 7:50. So can we be back by maximum 8:05 and then move forward with our discussion? Meanwhile, if you have any questions, please post the questions so that we'll take up after the break. Welcome back, everyone. Let me first see if you have any doubts, and then we shall move forward. MSW management refers to, it is municipal solid waste management. We are focusing on biofuel, but how we use without changing car and truck engine, because almost vehicle engines are still working on petrol or CNG. So see, what we are doing is a blending, right? We are blending bioethanol with petrol, and we are blending biodiesel with diesel. And with blending, the same engines that are working right now, they can work. Because even now, it's not that we are not blending ethanol. We already are blending ethanol. You'll see that in some of the cities, almost 10%, that is E10 fuel is being used. Some of the cities E20, some of the cities E8, etc. are being used. So we already are actually using the blending. We are just increasing that blending up to 20%. What are the environmental and economic benefits of using biogas as a renewable energy source? Environmentally, obviously, it is a clean source that the emission levels are much lesser. All right, emission levels are much lesser compared to any fuel that we have been using, any fossil fuel that we have been using. So that's there. Economically, because first of all, you are indigenously producing it. You're not dependent on any country. You're not dependent on any import. So indigenously, it is being produced altogether. So that has a positive impact on the domestic economy as well. And apart from that, usability is such that it's not only a commercial scale usage, but also at an individual level, also farmers can make the use of it. Or I mean, in general, also these kind of local usage also can be taken. It means that the organic solid waste which we collect in dump yards can actually be a potential source of methane harming the environment. Yes, it is. Actually, so what happens is, I'll tell you the problem. Problem where we are becoming a problem. That naturally, of course, there is a natural cycle. You know about the carbon cycle, right? There is a carbon cycle, sulfur cycle, nitrogen cycle, etc. that runs in the environment naturally. But in that, we have become an extra burden. So, for example, let's say if you talk about cow dung. So we are saying that if cow dung is decomposing, then it is adding methane to the environment. So bad. It is bad because we also have been adding a lot of methane via different methods. If we were not doing that, this natural process takes care of itself by itself without having any negative impact on the environment. But because we have added an extra burden of carbon dioxide, extra burden of methane, extra burden of other pollutants like sulfur dioxide, nitrogen dioxide, and so on, because of that, we have to look at how to offset that. So now, because we are adding more methane, we want to take care of these wastes so that whatever offset we are producing, that can be reduced. KLPD full form, it is kiloliters per day. How many kiloliters per day? So for example, when we write 100 KLPD, it means 100 kiloliters per day is the production happening in this particular plant. Kiloliters, just remember, kiloliters per day. 1 CR lit E10. Okay, this is 1 crore liters of E10 fuel. So E10 means 10% blending is happening. That's why we write it as E10. And this is a very commonly used term in the newspapers also. You'll find these terms like E10, E20, etc. So remember that this number denotes how much of blending is being done. How geothermal generation can release sulfur dioxide when the collection steam is later condensed and sent back to the ground. See, these are not sulfur dioxide, sulfur. They are sources of sulfur or hydrogen sulfide, not sulfur dioxide. Sulfur dioxide is not formed. So either hydrogen sulfide or sulfur. And these are actually natural sources of sulfur. You see, almost you'll see that a lot of these boiling mud pots or hot springs, etc. These are natural sources of sulfur. And when we start extracting this energy, there is a chance, just remember this, there is a potential chance that hydrogen sulfide gas might be produced here. Until now, thankfully, that has not happened. That practically we have not really seen hydrogen sulfide gas being produced, but there is a potential that something like this could happen. In the end, please give a one-line definition of all the terminologies like biofuel, bioethanol, etc., so that we can make. Okay, I'll do that. I'll do that. Just remind me towards the end of this chapter. I'll just list it out. What does it mean with 220,000? No, so I'm just saying that 20,000 tons of carbon dioxide can be saved. Lesser emission will happen with 1 crore liters of E10 fuel. So that is what we mean here. If the third generation biofuel generation becomes commercially viable, then can we reduce the problems caused by harmful algal blooms due to eutrophication? Potentially, yes, but how much it can happen, we don't really know, because then we'll start cultivating this algae instead of being dependent on the food crops. And even, for example, now we also have added seaweeds to the list of our. So seaweeds is also a kind of algae. So we have added seaweeds also in the list of the raw material that we are using. We can use electric vehicles replacing fossil fuel vehicles so the pollution will not spread. We had discussed about this point yesterday also, that it's a medium-term solution, can't be seen as a long-term solution. What did you say about MSW management? I was saying that municipal waste management basically can also be done, because a lot of solid waste is organic waste, and from that organic waste also you can generate biofuel. So that's why that also is a usable thing. Right. Now, lastly, one problem with biofuels, that in case of biofuels, again, the advantages are many. We know what the advantages are, more or less along the lines of what we discussed with solar energy or wind energy or geothermal energy. But in case of the issue, there is one issue that we also have to address, and that's related to the use of food crops. Because with the second generation being there, or the third generation being there, or the fourth generation also being spoken of now, even with all these, we still are largely dependent on generation one. You'll see that most of the biofuel production happening in the world, it's still first generation, because getting energy from second generation is not an easy task. Third generation, we still have been trying to find out the commercial ways of doing it. Fourth generation is completely experimental. So that's why we are still dependent largely on first generation for our energy needs. So that is a big challenge. All right, that is a big challenge right now, and because of that, there are multiple issues that can come in. So just understand these issues, that how there are dimensions of food security related to biofuel. Now, first and foremost, the production of genetically modified crops would be encouraged. Genetic modification in a manner which is aimed more towards biofuel industry than food industry. That we are doing genetic modifications in a manner that the crops are more useful as a fuel than as food. That's one problem. Then second problem could be that there could be a decrease of food import capacity, especially in the poorest of the countries. So what may happen is that let's say a country has surplus. So for example, let's say India has surplus, and this surplus was being exported to some of these countries. Now what the government might think is, why to export this, instead we can use it in a biofuel plant. Don't export it. So instead of, let's say, if you were exporting 100 kg of rice, just export 50 kg and use the rest 50 kg for our domestic production of biofuel. So in that case, what happens is supply, I mean, demand has not decreased. The demand for that from that country will be same. Demand is constant. Supply has decreased, so prices will increase. Basic economics, right? That if supply is, so I'm just writing it here. So here what happens? That demand is constant, right? Demand is constant. The supply is reduced. Supply is reduced. So what will happen? This will lead to price rise. Similarly, increase in food prices due to increasing demand for agricultural products. Because here what happens is now the demand increases because the same crop will be used for both food and fuel. So demand increases. Supply is constant because it's not that our productivity has increased. So supply is constant. Demand increases. What will it lead to? Again, price rise. So price of food items is anyway going to increase. Then the food and fuel are going to compete for land and water resources. So again, in this case, what happens? Resource cost increases because of competition. So this will also lead to price rise. So ultimately, we do see that it is going to increase the prices, and it's not only going to increase the prices, but we already see that prices are increasing. One survey that was done in Europe, it finds that there is almost a 15% increase in the prices of all those crops that are used for biofuel production. Even if you take away the inflation, even then there is almost a 15% increase in the prices just because of biofuels, just because that these are also the crops that are not only our food but also useful as fuel. So that's why it is something not for the future, but rather something that we already are seeing. Then after that, the demand of food crops, fuel crops may also lead to a lower food quality and diversity and threatening the nutrition of people. Because what will happen here is that now our focus would shift from the quality of produce to the quantity of produce, because we want to produce more so that we can use it in all the industries possible. So that's going to be a problem. And then water availability for human consumption will also be threatened, because many of these problems that we are looking at is also concerned with regards to the resource. Now, if you think of some of the crops, I mean, can you name the crops that use the most amount of water? Which are these crops that use the most amount of water? Yeah, sugarcane and paddy, or rice, right? So sugarcane and rice, or sugarcane and paddy, we know that they use a lot of water, and sugarcane is a raw material for us, correct? Sugarcane is a raw material, rice is a raw material. So of course, if we start cultivating more of sugarcane, it needs a lot more water. So water availability is also a problem. So water availability available for human consumption will also be threatened in these kind of cases. So that's why we know that in all these scenarios, there are a lot of issues that can be created, and this is one aspect especially that we need to be aware of. And that's why something like this can become a potential question also for you in the mains examination. So understand these various aspects of how this can affect negatively. It can have a negative impact altogether. All right. Now, coming to the next part of our chapter, which is nuclear energy. Now, as far as nuclear energy goes, first and foremost, from the perspective of your examination, both prelims and mains examination, I would say that it is an important topic. It has been traditionally, it has been a very, very important topic. A lot of questions have come in the past. A lot of questions are expected to come, and also it has been an evergreen topic. It has been a topic from where UPSC has always been picking questions from. Now, when it comes to nuclear energy as a topic, there are two parts to this part of the chapter. First, we'll discuss the science of nuclear energy. We'll try to understand what exactly do we mean by nuclear energy. How do we get this energy? We'll discuss about all these things, and then the second part will be about nuclear technology, where we'll discuss about nuclear reactors. We'll discuss about the various different reactors in India, India's nuclear program, the applications of nuclear energy. So these are the aspects for the second half of our discussion. The first half of our discussion will be more of the science behind nuclear energy and how exactly do we use nuclear energy. Right. So this is basically what we are going to discuss. Now, before we move forward, there's one more announcement for you. I don't know whether you attended the class yesterday that was taken by Salman sir, but what we are going to do for now is that all the recordings of these lectures are going to be available for you without any time limitation. That the time limitation that we had put, and past few days you all also have been talking about this, you have been suggesting this, that we should move back to how the things were. So for now, we have decided that we are going to move back to that, and all the recordings of all these lectures will be made available to you, and it will remain available to you for longer duration. It will be available as it was. So the new announcement that we had made, we have nullified that. Having said that, I also have a request with you. There was one strong reason why we were doing something like this. We have seen a huge drop in the number of attendees in the live lectures since the time we announced that the recordings would be available. Those of you who are old students, you might know that initially there was no recording, right? We did not give any recording at all. And when we were not giving any recordings, more students were actually coming to the class. Since the time we started giving recordings, a lot of students have started skipping the classes. Discipline issues we have countered. We see that a lot of students do not come in the class on time. They leave early, they come late, because they know, I mean, I'm not pointing out anyone here, but I'm telling you that this has been happening, that many come late, they leave early. And problem is that even after that, it's not that many of the students are watching those recordings. It's just like what happens with our notes and books, that you collect all the notes and books and after that you forget about them, just thinking that now I have it, I can read it whenever I want. Something similar has been happening in the live classes as well. So that was one of the major concerns that we had, because of which we did not really want the recordings to go out, because we saw this kind of an indiscipline among the students. So it's a humble, not humble request that please come to the live classes. Don't depend on the recordings, because if you were supposed to depend on recordings, you already have the tablet lectures. So why would we why to see these recordings? You have another set of recordings. So please, I understand that when recordings are required, for example, let's say you're not well, could not come to the class for some kind of emergency, that's when you have the recordings for, or maybe the revision that you want to do, that's what you have the recordings for. But it should not be that, okay, who would wake up at 6 a.m. in the morning, let me sleep for now, I'll wake up at 10 a.m. nicely, and then after that I'll think of going through the recordings. Please don't do these things. So that's why that's the very strong reason that why we felt that something like this perhaps is required, but we have taken it back. Please be sincere in the classroom and come to the class on time. It is only going to help you more than anyone, right? So anyway, let's move forward. So nuclear energy. Now, when we are talking about nuclear energy, as I told you that there are two parts to this. One will be the science of nuclear energy, and then that's the second part is the technology related to nuclear energy. The science part is also a bit complex. It is one of the most complex technologies from where we extract energy. Not easy to extract energy from, but one of the most significant energy technologies available to us. So the first part, the nuclear energy part, the understanding of the basics of where do we get this energy from, is a bit complex part. Please pay attention, and if you have any doubts, I'm always open to questions. So first and foremost, when we say nuclear energy, nuclear term comes from nucleus. So when we say nuclear, means that it is coming from the nucleus of an atom. Okay? It is coming from the nucleus of an atom, meaning the energy that is present inside the nucleus of an atom is the nuclear energy. Now, how are we able to harness this energy, and how did we know about this energy? So, first and foremost, let's go back a bit into the history of our understanding of nuclear, our understanding of the structure of atom. If you go back to the early understanding of the atom, you'll find that initially it was thought that atom is indestructible. There was the Dalton's atomic theory, and according to the Dalton's atomic theory, atom is indestructible. That he had given a theory that there is nothing inside this atom. Atom is the smallest indestructible part of matter, according to him. So this is an understanding that we believed in for a very long time. But then after that, we see that that was broken when electrons were discovered, and the electrons discovery was done by a scientist, J.J. Thomson. So J.J. Thomson had given his own atomic structure. It was a very different atomic structure. So he had given his own atomic structure, and this atomic structure was more like a watermelon, just like a watermelon. That if you cut the watermelon, you see that there is a reddish colored part, and you have all the seeds which are embedded in it. Correct. So his model was very similar. That all these seeds basically they represent the electrons, and the reddish part of your watermelon is the positively charged sphere. So that's why there is a positively charged sphere in which embedded particles of negative charge are there, according to his model. So in a manner, he discovered electrons. All right, he discovered electrons. So electron discovery happened, and we now knew that we can't say that atom is indestructible because electrons are present inside the atom. Then after that, discovery of protons happened. So when discovery of protons happened, J.J. Thomson model also was discarded. Now, discovery of proton. If I ask you, who discovered proton? Who discovered proton? Okay, so a lot of you are saying Rutherford. A couple of you also saying Goldstein. Chadwick is not the answer. James Chadwick discovered neutrons. So Rutherford and Goldstein. There are two names that I see here. Right now, the thing is, it's very difficult to say who discovered proton because Goldstein had done his experiment where he found positively charged particles, although in a very different context, but he found positively charged particles. And then Rutherford also did his experiment, and he also defined a proton, and he actually had given the name proton. He was the one who gave the name proton, and his experiment was very different. So these two scientists independently had found out positively charged particles. Now Goldstein, I think, did it in 1897, if I'm not wrong, 1897, and Rutherford almost 20 years later, but in a very different context. So Rutherford discovered it as a part of the nucleus of an atom, whereas in case of Goldstein, it was a positively charged discharged tube where he had found those particles. So both of them in very different contexts independently had discovered a proton. So although much wider acceptance is given to Rutherford because Rutherford had also defined the nucleus and he had defined the positively charged particles, that is protons, inside the nucleus. So that's why more number of people believe that it should be given to Rutherford because what Goldstein had discovered, although they were charged particles, positively charged particles, but in a very different context. But still saying it's very difficult to say who to give this discovery to, but largely it is Rutherford. Right? But that's, I mean, largely it is Rutherford, but I don't want to take it away from Goldstein. That's why I'm discussing about Goldstein as well. So discovery of proton happened. Now we thought that our atom is complete. We thought that our atom is complete, that we have the positively charged particles, we have the negatively charged particles, they are equal in number, and hence this is what the atom is. So atom is made of electrons and protons. This is what we understood. Now we come across a complexity, and this complexity, this complexity basically is in terms of something called as an isotope. Something called as an isotope. So how do we define an isotope? Isotope, we say that these are atoms of the same element with same atomic number, and rather than that it should be but different mass number. Different mass number. All right. So atoms of the same element which have same atomic number but different mass number. Can you tell me what is atomic number and what is mass number? What is atomic number and what is mass number? Alright, okay. I have a poll for you because I see that so many of you are writing so many things. Very quickly, when we define atomic number, if I ask you how to define atomic number, is it number of protons? Is it number of electrons? Is it both? How do we define atomic number? Number of protons, number of electrons, or both? Alright, so 39% of you say A, 29% B, and 32% C. So let me be very clear here, and I know that this is a kind of confusion that very often students have, that atomic number, when we define atomic number, remember this, atomic number will be defined as, I'm writing it here, will be defined as number of protons, right? Number of protons, not number of electrons or not both. Why? why defined as. It can also be equal to number of electrons in a neutral atom. Right? It can also be equal to number of electrons in a neutral atom, because we know in a neutral atom number of electrons and number of protons are same. So that's why if number of protons is x, then number of protons also, electrons also will be x. So that's fine. But when we always define it as number of protons. Can somebody give me a reason that why do we always define it as number of protons and we don't define it as number of electrons? Yes, Saloni, you are correct. Deepika, you are correct. Govind, you are correct. Chaitanya, you are correct. Janvi, you are correct. Ashish, correct. Raghav, correct. Wonderful. Great to see that so many of you know the answer already. But let me define it for others. So see, understand this, that the proton that we have, proton is present inside the nucleus, right? It is present inside the nucleus of an atom, and protons do not leave this nucleus easily. They do not leave this nucleus easily. They'll just sit there. They'll sit inside the nucleus. It's not easy to ask them to leave, right? They are the laziest of all the subatomic particles. But that's not the case with electrons. Electrons can be gained or lost. So for example, when you say that it's a positively charged ion or negatively charged ion, so positive charge or negative charge happens not because of protons and electrons being lost or gained. So when you say that, let's say there is a positively charged element, so positive charge does not mean extra proton. Positive charge means less electrons. All right, negative charge means more electrons. So it's always electrons, because the outermost shell that we have, if you go to this structure, the outermost shell that we have here, from here, electrons can be gained or lost. Protons can't be. All right, so protons, that's why the number of protons is the most intrinsic property of any given element. All right, it is something that defines that particular element itself. So that's why same atomic number, and that's why I've written it twice. Just for this very purpose, that I need not have to write same element. That's, I mean, understandable that atoms with same atomic number with different atomic mass will be called as the isotopes, right? But I've written the same element part just to make it very clear that we are talking about same element where you have the variations. Okay, so just understand this. Just understand this, that when we define, we always define it as number of protons. And how do we define mass number? As many of you already have written, mass number is number of protons plus neutrons. All right, number of protons plus neutrons inside the nucleus of an atom, that becomes the mass number. All right, so same atomic number, different mass number. So this understanding of isotope led to the discovery of neutron, because when we look at hydrogen, there are three different types of hydrogen: hydrogen, deuterium, and tritium. In case of hydrogen, atomic number is 1. All right, atomic number is always 1. Atomic number is 1, meaning that there is one proton. Correct, there is one proton. Now the normal hydrogen has mass number of 1. Mass number means 1 means what? That proton is 1, neutron is 0, then only 1 plus 0 equal to 1. So that's why mass number is 1. So as you can see, only proton and electron. Then you have deuterium. In case of deuterium, we see that mass number is 2, meaning you have 1 proton and you have 1 neutron, and of course you have 1 electron. This is deuterium. And then you have tritium, in which you have still 1 proton. That's why we are saying that the number of protons is the most important property. 1 proton, 1 electron, and this time 2 neutrons. So this is where the understanding of a neutron came from. That while analyzing all these isotopes of hydrogen, we found that the ratio of masses of hydrogen is in ratio of 1:2:3. Now we know that there are electrons, and we know that there are protons, and until now we know that there's nothing else. It's only protons and electrons. So if there is only protons and electrons, then how is it possible that the masses are in the ratio of 1:2:3? Because if the masses are in the ratio of 1:2:3, it means that deuterium and tritium has something extra which is adding to this whole number mass. Now if let's say it was an extra electron, it can't be, because electrons are much lighter in weight, almost 80-40 times lighter than protons. So as you can see, protons have a mass of 1.67 into 10 to the power of minus 27 kg. Electrons have a mass of 9.1 into 10 to the power of minus 31 kg. So that's why almost 2,000 times lighter as compared to a proton. So that's why to offset or balance the extra proton, you would need a total of 1840 electrons. So then it will be a negatively charged particle. So that's not the case. So so if there is a whole number ratio of 1:2:3, then it means that there should be something extra. There should be something extra apart from protons and electrons that has a mass which is equal to the mass of proton and does not carry any charge. It should not carry any charge, but it should have a mass equal to the mass of proton. And that is basically what we see in case of neutrons, that the mass of neutron is pretty much equal to the mass of a proton. Right? Pretty much equal to the mass of proton. So this is where discovery of neutron happened, that there must be, apart from electrons and protons, there must be another particle which has a mass almost equal to proton but does not carry any charge. And since it does not carry any charge, it became a neutron. From neutral, it has been derived and it became neutron. And James Chadwick, he was awarded a Nobel Prize also for this discovery of neutron. So now it is now established that you have an atom. In this atom, you have something like this, that there are various shells. These electron orbits are also called as shells. So we have all these shells, and in these shells we have the electrons, and at the center we have a part which is called as the nucleus. We have the nucleus, and inside the nucleus we have protons and neutrons. Right? Protons and neutrons are present inside the nucleus of an atom. So this much we have established, right? This much we know about the structure of an atom. Now comes the complexity. So one problem that we were seeing is initial discussion and initial days of our understanding of the nucleus, that there is a concept called as mass defect. What the scientists were basically trying to understand is that if, let's say, there is a nucleus, and inside this nucleus there is only 1 proton and 1 neutron. Let's take an example that you have a nucleus. Inside the nucleus you have 1 proton and 1 neutron, and both of them, let's say the neutron weight is also 10 grams and the proton weight is also 10 grams, and there is only 1 proton and 1 neutron like this. So the weight of this nucleus should be 20 grams, ideally should be 20 grams. But what we have discovered is that it is not 20 grams but maybe 15 grams. Now, if it was 25 instead of 20, it was still manageable, because then it would mean that there is something extra that we perhaps have not discovered yet, and hence we do not know it. Hence we do not know about it, and that's why we do not know where that extra mass is coming. But the problem is that there is no extra mass. Instead, we are losing mass. So where is that 5 gram going? Where is this 5 extra gram going? This is something that the scientists could not understand for a very long time. They did not know what was happening. So they named it as mass defect. That there is some kind of defect in the mass of this nucleus. So they name it as mass defect. Until now, they did not know that there can be a relation between mass and energy, and this is something that was established by, again, coming back to the scientist, as I told you that he'll come back in every chapter. So here he comes back. So Albert Einstein, in his special theory of special relativity, he gave this famous equation. Have you heard of this equation? Whether you know about it or not is another matter, but you've heard of it, right? E is equal to mc squared. So he gave this famous equation, E is equal to mc squared. Now E equal to mc squared basically established a relation between energy and mass, right? This E here is energy, m is mass, and c is speed of sound. Sorry, speed of light, right? It is speed of light. How much is it? 3 into 10 to the power of 8 meters per second, right? So this is basically speed of light. So ultimately what we are seeing here is that this is how the conversion is like. This is where we see that now he established through his theory of special relativity, he established that mass can be considered as a form of energy. Mass can be considered as a form of energy, and this is the relation between them. And just look at the amount of energy that mass contains. So for example, let's say if you have mass equal to 1 kg, how much is the energy? Energy will be 1 into 3 into 10 to the power of 8 squared, that is 9 into 10 to the power of 16 joules of energy. So with 1 kg mass, this is the amount of energy that it contains inside the nucleus. So that is basically what we understood now, that okay fine, energy and mass are related. And that is where we understand that this mass defect was not really a defect, but rather it was some mass getting converted into energy while these while you are trying to, let's say, put the neutrons and protons together, or to contain these protons and neutrons together inside. So this mass defect was not really a defect, but rather some amount of mass converting into energy. So this actually was some mass converting to energy. It was some mass that is converting into energy. So this is where the concept of nuclear binding energy comes. Now, this is where we realize the potential of nuclear energy. That we understand that we find there is some mass that is converting into energy. Good. But how much energy is what excited us? That this energy with which the nucleus binds every particle inside, all the protons and neutrons which are inside the nucleus, we see that there's a very strong force with which it tries to bind everything inside. That is where the concept of strong nuclear force comes from. All right. This is where we arrive at strong nuclear force. So remember we discussed that there are 4 fundamental forces. We had discussed when we were discussing string theory. Correct. So there we had discussed that there are 4 fundamental forces: strong nuclear force, weak nuclear force, electromagnetic force, and gravitational force, right? So here strong nuclear force basically comes from here. Strong nuclear force is the force with which the nucleus binds its particles together, keeps its particles together like protons and neutrons. And this is where the concept of binding energy comes from, or nuclear binding energy comes from. The nuclear binding energy is the energy with which the nucleus tries to bind everything together, or the kind of energy that will be released if you are trying to do something to this nucleus. If let's say extra particles are coming in, or some particles are going down, going out, or let's say the nucleus is breaking, in all these scenarios, the kind of energy that will be released, is called as the nuclear binding energy, right? So nuclear binding energy that binds protons and neutrons inside the nucleus. The force corresponding to nuclear binding energy is called strong nuclear force. Okay, so this is where the concept of strong nuclear force comes into the picture. So now we understood that okay, fine, this energy that is there inside the nucleus, this is an enormous amount of energy, and this energy then can be used in variety of things. It can be used in electricity generation, it can be used as a source of energy for infrastructure and whatnot. Even as a fuel, we can use it. What is the first thing that we do? We drop an atom bomb. After knowing about all these things and all these experiments that was done over the ages, over 20, 30, 40 years of time, we first made an atom bomb, dropped it on Japan, and then we realized, oh, we can also produce electricity from here. So unfortunate beginnings, but then we see that it takes a better turn after that. So nuclear binding energy basically comes from here, and we have a basic understanding of this energy and the amount of energy that is actually being packed here. Now, so these things we understood. That okay, fine. Just to recap of what we know, that you have an atom. Inside the atom there are various shells. In these shells you have electrons. Center of the atom you have a nucleus. Inside the nucleus you have protons and neutrons. The nucleus binds the protons and neutrons with a very, very, very strong force called as the strong nuclear force. The energy that binds it is called as the nuclear binding energy. Now just imagine that these are very strong forces, because you have many protons, for example, inside this very tiny nucleus, and the nucleus size compared to the atom is very, very tiny. It's very, very small. So in this very small space, all the positive charges are stuck. They obviously repel each other. Correct? You might have studied this in the lower classes. You might remember it from lower classes. Like charges repel each other, unlike charges attract each other. Correct? So here you have like charges, that there are so many positive charges that are confined inside this nucleus. So obviously there's a lot of repulsion force, a lot of repulsive electromagnetic force, but yet it doesn't matter to this strong nuclear force, because strong nuclear force is very strong and it does not let these kind of things happen so easily. So ultimately we have a basic understanding of where this energy is coming from. The nucleus itself is packing a lot of energy. Now this energy is released in various different forms. This energy can be released in terms of nuclear fission. This energy can also be released in terms of nuclear fusion, and this energy can also be released in terms of something called as radioactivity. Right? It can also be released through radioactivity. So just remember. So I'll just write right here. Energy can be released through radioactivity, through nuclear fission, or through nuclear fusion. And this is what basically we are going to learn next. This is what we are going to learn next, that these are the three ways in which energy can be released, either through radioactivity or through nuclear fission or through nuclear fusion. Now, first and foremost, what do we see in radioactivity? What do we mean by radioactivity? So, what we see is that an unstable nucleus undergoes a decay. This is referred to as radioactive decay. Right? Unstable nucleus. What do we mean by unstable nucleus? So, understand this, that there are two ways in which instability can come in. One, the first one will be when number of protons is high. When the number of protons is high in any given nucleus, I'm just writing it clearly. Number of protons in a nucleus is high. Right? Number of protons in a nucleus is very high. And then secondly, when number of protons is not equal to number of neutrons. All right, number of protons is not equal to number of neutrons. That is one kind of instability. And when number of protons in a nucleus is very high, that's another kind of instability. So the first one, whenever that happens, this is something that is also called as alpha decay. This is something that we call as alpha decay. Whereas in case of number of protons and neutrons not being equal, this is something that we call as beta decay. All right, so that's why we have alpha decay and we have beta decay. Now, apart from these two, the third one is called as gamma decay. So, in gamma decay, we see that high energy photons are emitted. So, radioactivity basically is a natural process which will happen whenever you have all these cases. All right, whenever you have these kind of cases, whether it is an asymmetry between number of protons and neutrons, or if it is about the number of protons being very high. So, because when number of protons is very high, what happens? The repulsive force will keep on increasing. Now, there will be a time, obviously, when the repulsive force is so strong that the nucleus will not be able to hold everything together, and this is where we see that some of the particles they basically will start going out. Some of these particles will be lost. So, that's what we see. So overall, alpha, beta, and gamma decay. So, radioactivity is a natural process that will be seen in anything that is unstable, in any one of these two types of instability. And gamma decay, largely what we see with gamma decay is that gamma decay always runs along with alpha or beta decay. So this can also be denoted like this: alpha decay, beta decay, and gamma decay. Alpha, beta, and gamma decay. So generally speaking, what we see is that gamma decay accompanies alpha and beta decay. So this is a natural way in which whatever is unstable will keep on losing its mass through radioactivity. Now, first one here is alpha decay. Now, for alpha decay, just remember, when is alpha decay happening? When number of protons is high. Number of protons is high, meaning that it is only visible, it is a phenomena associated with heavy elements. Right? Alpha decay is something that we see in heavy elements. So what exactly happens in alpha decay? So here what you see is that from plutonium to uranium conversion is happening. So plutonium to uranium. So what you see is that here this number has decreased by 2 and this number has decreased by 4. Okay? And this 4, this basically is equivalent to helium nucleus, that is 4He2. So alpha particle, in a manner you can say that it is equivalent to having this 2He4, that is helium 2. So now this is what alpha decay is. That alpha decay, with alpha decay, the elements will try to get towards the stability. So that's why they'll keep releasing these particles. They'll keep releasing this kind of. Now, second one is beta decay. Now, in case of beta decay, what we basically see is that this will happen. This will happen when number of protons is not equal to number of neutrons. So that is the basic agenda of beta decay. Now, if you see here, there are two types of beta decay that has been portrayed here. One from carbon 14 to nitrogen 15, nitrogen 14, and secondly from carbon 10 to boron 10. Now, how do I denote carbon 14? Carbon 14 can be written like this. So my question for you, can you tell me how many protons and how many neutrons in carbon 14? How many protons and how many neutrons in carbon 14? Yes, 6 and 8. Perfect. So we have 6 protons and 8 neutrons. Adds up to 14. Now, if this number 14 has to be stable, then for stability, what do we mean? What do we need? We need 7 plus 7. So we should have 7 protons and 7 neutrons. And which is this element? This is nitrogen. This is how we denote nitrogen, 7 and 14. All right, because this is how it gets to symmetry, and this is what beta decay wants to do to gain stability. To gain stability, this is something that we see. Secondly, if you see, you have carbon 10. So carbon 10 can be denoted like this. Then again, how many protons and how many neutrons? How many protons and how many neutrons here? Yes, 6 and 4, correct. So 6 protons and 4 neutrons adds up to 10. 10, if it has to be symmetrical, means that it should be 5 plus 5, correct? It should be 5 plus 5. So ultimately, this is what? This is boron. This is boron. So this is how stability can be reached with beta decay. So in beta decay, what is happening is that we are actually looking at a change. So now there can be one more question here. All right. We see that from 8 protons, with 6 protons, we went on to 7 protons, and from 8 neutrons to 7 neutrons. In the second case, from 6 protons to 5 protons, and from 4 neutrons to 5 neutrons. Now, how exactly, let's say from this perspective, when we are looking at the neutrality of and a basic stability of this structure. So from this perspective, does it mean that there is an extra proton coming from somewhere? Because what we see here is that this 6 goes to 7 and this 8 becomes 7. So really here also we see that 6 becomes 5 and 4 becomes 5. Correct? Now, in this particular scenario, does it mean that there is a proton coming from outside? The answer is no. Answer is that one neutron here gets converted into proton. In first case, there is a neutron converting into proton, and in the second case, there is a proton that is converting into a neutron. So there is an internal rearrangement. You can see that this is an internal this is an internal rearrangement. So internal rearrangement means this, that one of the particles is changing into another. Either protons are changing into neutrons or neutrons are changing into protons. One of the two will happen. So in beta decay, just remember that here mass number remains unchanged. Mass number remains unchanged. So mass number does not change. 14 remains 14 and 10 remains 10. Just that more symmetrical structure is what we gain from here. Then after this we have gamma decay. Now in case of gamma decay, what we see is that ultimately gamma decay is about release of energy, directly release of energy. So what we see is that in case of gamma decay, largely what we see is that when alpha or beta decay results in dotted nuclei in an excited state, this is where gamma decay happens. So something like this, that after alpha decay has happened or after beta decay has happened, the nucleus is in an excited state. Right? It is in an excited state, meaning that it has more energy than usual. It has more energy than it should. So then in that case, the extra energy that we have, that extra energy is gamma, and that extra energy will be taken away. That extra energy will be taken away so that they are again back to the relaxed nucleus. Right? They are back to the relaxed nucleus. So hence we say that gamma decay basically will release some energy. Gamma decay will release some energy in terms of gamma photons. So overall, this is how we look at radioactivity. Now, when you do the comparison of how much energy each one has, you'll see that alpha radiation has the lowest. That even with a thin sheet of paper, you can stop alpha decay, or you can stop alpha rays. Then in case of beta, it has slightly more power, so you'll need a thin sheet of metal so that you can stop beta radiation. In case of gamma radiation, even that metal is not enough, so we'll have a thick lead wall that can prevent it. Same goes for X-rays as well, that they can be stopped by a thick sheet of lead. Then lastly, neutrons. Neutrons can very easily just pass through paper, pass through aluminium, pass through lead, etc. And we need a very thick concrete wall or very thick steel walls to contain neutrons. Otherwise, containing neutrons will be very, very difficult. And because of the amount of energy that they carry, crucial amount of energy that they can be very dangerous as well. So that's why we have to take utmost care of all these subatomic particles and radiations. So this is where we arrive at nuclear fission, right? This is where we arrive at nuclear fission. Now, first is radioactivity. Radioactivity is a natural process, and any matter or any element that is radioactive will naturally keep on releasing some amount of energy in terms of heat most of the times. Now, there comes another way in which we can get this energy, and this is nuclear fission. Nuclear fission. So what we see in nuclear fission is, what we do in nuclear fission is that an atom or rather a nucleus will be split. Right? The nucleus will be split, and while the nucleus splits, it releases a lot of energy. It releases a lot of energy and some extra neutrons. It releases a lot of energy, and it also releases some extra neutron. Now, in this particular scenario, what we basically see is that let's look at this diagram. You'll have a better understanding here. So if you see this, what we do in this process is that we take uranium, all right, uranium 235 to be exact. We take uranium, and this uranium is bombarded with a neutron. Now, as soon as it is bombarded with a neutron, what will happen? This 235 becomes 236. Okay, 235 becomes 236. So atomic number does not change, mass number changes because there is one extra neutron. Now, this uranium 236 is very highly unstable. Right? It's very highly unstable. So what happens is that it breaks into two parts. This nucleus now breaks into two parts. So you have krypton and barium. Right? So it splits into two parts, krypton and barium, while releasing a lot of energy. Which is in terms of kinetic energy and gamma decay. Let me write gamma radiations. Kinetic energy from plus gamma radiations, that will be the energy. Plus, if you see, there are three extra neutrons. Now, where is this three extra neutron coming from? If you see the mass number, you have 236 on this side, you have 92 plus 141, which is equal to 233. So there is a deficit of 3. So this deficit is not really a deficit, right? This deficit is not deficit, but rather the 3 extra neutrons. Now here on, what happens is, so this is the entire process of nuclear fission, right? This is the basic process of nuclear fission. Now in this particular scenario, understand something that happens here, that we have 3 extra neutrons. Now these 3 extra neutrons will go on to bombard more such nuclei, right? More such uranium. Because just remember this, that in this particular scenario, in this particular scenario, you do not have just one particle of uranium, right? You don't have just one particle of uranium, you have multiple such particles. So, for example, if I ask you, how many atoms do you have in 1 gram of uranium? Can you tell me about this? That do you know how many of them will be here? What will be the basic of even determining this? Avogadro number, right? So there is something called as Avogadro number, and yes, Chaitanya, you have laid down perfectly that how exactly the things will be. So overall, when you do the calculation with regards to Avogadro number, which is what is Avogadro number? I'm going back to class 9th chemistry basically. So Avogadro number, or class 10th rather. Avogadro number is what? 6.022 into 10 to the power of 23, right? So now when we are looking at 1 gram of uranium-235, it will be basically, you can say that you can divide this number by 235, and then you will get the number, and the number will be approximately 10 to the power of 21. So 1 gram of uranium-235, 1 gram of uranium-235 will have 10 to the power of 21 atoms, or same number of nuclei as well, correct? So in the sample, why I'm talking about all this is, in the sample, it's not that you have just one particle. It's not that you have just one atom of uranium-235. You have 10 to the power of 21 atoms, or 10 to the power of 21 nuclei of uranium. So just imagine the amount of uranium that we have here. So that's why these 3 extra neutrons, what will they do? They will go on to bombard 3 more uranium. Right? So 3 more nuclei of uranium will be bombarded with them. From there on, again, you have 3 extra neutrons. So these 3 extra neutrons will keep going further like this. And same continues. Same continues. So this is something that does not end here. So in a manner, what happens is that a chain reaction is set up. A chain reaction is set up because of these extra neutrons that we have, and this can go uncontrolled. This can go uncontrolled. If you don't try to control it, if you control it, you produce electricity. If you don't control it, you produce an atom bomb. So there is a fine line between producing an atom bomb and using it for electricity generation. So that's why we need to control this chain reaction one way or another. So to control this chain reaction, there is a concept of critical mass. There's a concept of critical mass, and this critical mass basically is something that helps you control the chain reaction. So now to control the chain reaction, we basically need a certain amount of this uranium-235. So we should not have more, we should not have less. When you have exactly the critical mass, this is where you can start using nuclear fission reaction for electricity generation. If let's say the critical mass is less than what's required, then the reaction stops quickly because you do not have sufficient neutrons to carry on the reaction. But then if let's say it exceeds the critical mass, then in that case you have extra neutrons, uncontrolled chain reaction can be set up, which can obviously be very dangerous. So this is why critical mass becomes very, very crucial. And just to give you a context, there is a factor called as K. And when K is equal to 1, we say that this is critical mass, right? When K is equal to 1, we say that it is critical mass. If K is 0.99, even if K is 0.99, what happens is that this reaction will stop quickly. And even if, or let's say if K is 1.01, then what we see is that rate of reaction increases by 22,000 times. So just imagine that when K is equal to 1, it is critical mass. When K is 1.01, the rate of reaction would increase by 22,000 times. So we cannot afford to have this kind of a complexity here. So that's why critical mass becomes very, very crucial to understand how to control the chain reaction. So above critical mass, the reaction may accelerate into nuclear explosion if uncontrolled. Now this is one kind of a problem. One problem is to control the chain reaction. There's another problem, and this is about and this is basically about what kind of uranium we are using. Because when you look at natural uranium or the uranium that we are mining, we find two types of uranium there: uranium-235 and uranium-238. Uranium-235 and uranium-238, where uranium-235 can be used as a fuel. Uranium-238 is of no use. Uranium-238 cannot produce nuclear fission. That even if let's say you bombard uranium-238 with an extra neutron, it will simply digest it. It will simply absorb it and do nothing. Natural radioactivity will keep on happening, but fission wouldn't occur. Uranium-235, just remember this, that uranium-235 is the only natural isotope that is capable of nuclear reactions. Alright, only natural material. Uranium-238 cannot be. Now the problem here is that out of this, 99.3% is uranium-238 and only 0.7% is uranium-235. So out of let's say 100 grams of natural uranium, only 0.7 gram of natural uranium, 0.7 gram of natural uranium is uranium-235, and 99.3% of uranium is uranium-238. The problem, we can't use uranium-238 for fission. Only way we can do nuclear fission is through uranium-235. So this is where a concept called as enrichment comes into the picture. This is where we talk about enrichment. So enrichment basically means increasing the concentration of uranium-235. Increasing the concentration of uranium-235 is called as enrichment. So basically what happens is that from 0.7% we go up to 3 to 5%, right? We go up to 3 to 5%. So that is called as enrichment. Now can we not do enrichment beyond that? The answer is yes, we can. But if we breach this limit, once we breach this limit and go beyond this limit, this is where now this uranium-235 starts to become very unstable. It starts to become very unstable, and that is what can be used to weaponize. Recently it has been in the news. Last year US basically said that Iran is doing enrichment, and Iran, according to them, they say that Iran has done enrichment beyond 85%. We are discussing this 3 to 5% enrichment. That if you go beyond 5% enrichment, it means that you are not using it for electricity anymore. You are enriching it so that you can create atom bomb. So now US has accused Iran of doing enrichment beyond this acceptable 5%, and forget about 5%. They are saying that beyond 80% enrichment already has been achieved by Iran. So that is what enrichment is. That enrichment done in a right way, again electricity; done in a wrong way, atom bomb. So that is what we mean by enrichment. So that's why just remember these two basic concepts behind nuclear fission. One, the concept of critical mass and why critical mass is so critical, and then the process of enrichment. The enrichment process where we are trying to increase the concentration of uranium-235. Next is nuclear fusion, but let's stop the class here. We'll discuss about nuclear fusion. We'll discuss about the other things in our next class. This part, the last 1 hour, what we have discussed can be a bit complex. So please go back and revise it further. Revise it again. And if you have any doubts, please bring them back. So meanwhile, if you have any questions, please let me know. Let's discuss that, and then we shall end the class for today. Due to the uranium-235, the conventional current flow into the mantle. Okay, yes, correct. India also enriched uranium to make the bomb. Yes, we already have done it. Okay, so definition of all the terminologies is something that you asked. So let me go back there only and I'll write it along with. So we have bioenergy, right? First of all. So bioenergy is what? Bioenergy is nothing but energy from biological source. Energy from biological source will be called as bioenergy, and this biological source is nothing but biomass. So what is biomass? Biomass is the biological material. Derived from a living or recently living organism. So this is what biomass is. Then biofuel. So when we say that something is a biofuel, biofuel simply means that it is a hydrocarbon fuel derived from biomass in short period of time. Right? Then we have bioethanol. So bioethanol basically is a kind of biofuel derived from esterification of oil seeds. Sorry, this is biodiesel. This is biodiesel. And then we have bioethanol. So bioethanol is biofuel which is derived from fermentation of energy crops or sugar-based crops. So I hope this clears the confusion. How to get feedback where I'm on good track or not, and guidelines to improve further. It's best if you talk to a mentor about this. Talk to them about where you are, when are you writing examination, how much time you have. Explain everything to them so that they can give you an ideal approach accordingly with regards to what's happening. Critical mass. So critical mass is that mass which is required for running a sustainable chain reaction, a controlled chain reaction. So for a controlled chain reaction, we need that critical mass. So let's say if we have found that critical mass is 20 kg, so then we need to maintain that 20 kg. Neither 20.1 kg nor 19.9 kg, 20 kg. K in critical mass is just a factor. I'm not going there because that's pure nuclear physics and it's unexplainable. I mean, I know the equation, it's a big equation, and from there on, we derive that factor. But this K factor, I just wanted to give you the context that how drastically things can change, that only from 1 to 1.01, the rate of reaction can change by 22,000 times and can go uncontrolled. So with small, minor mistakes, something like this could happen. So I just wanted to give you the context, otherwise, it's very technical in nature to even understand what K factor is. How to nuclear 4 and 7? Roshan, I did not get your question. If you can reiterate the question, please. Repeat the reaction briefly. Which reaction are we talking about? Avogadro number basically is a number that defines the number of particles that you have in any given matter, that whether the number of atoms or number of protons or number of nucleons or whatever it is. How do we isolate a single neutron for fission? We actually get the neutron out of the nuclear processes, and from there on it is isolated. Where uranium-238 can be used? It can be used in various things. For example, uranium-238 can be used for getting uranium-235. It can be used for irradiation or getting the radiations for various different purposes. We'll discuss that later. Tomorrow, I mean, not. I think we have the next class on Monday, so we'll discuss on Monday. Repeat again how we reach 0.7. We don't reach 0.7. It is the natural setup. It is the natural setup that 100 grams of natural uranium has 0.7 grams of uranium-235 and 99.3 grams of uranium-238. That's the natural composition. We do not do anything. Didn't discuss International Space Station, not required. There's nothing extra going on there, so it's not a discussion required for us. Can you please explain how internal arrangement takes place in radioactive decay? How an unstable nucleus becomes stable without losing neutrons or protons? See, basically what happens is that the mass determination has to be done and how mass versus charge is arranged inside the atom, or rather inside the nucleus. So if the mass versus charge ratio, if it starts to get distorted, then in that case we start facing problems. So that's why to maintain that we need a stability, or we need exact same number of protons and neutrons. If the numbers are stable, if they are equal, then the chances are that they will be better. Did not understand the percentages you wrote. Is it concentration of uranium or availability on a percentage? I mean, what I'm saying is that out of, sorry, yeah, what I'm saying is that if you mine uranium, if you have mined 100 grams of uranium, out of those 100 grams of uranium, only 0.7 gram of it will be uranium-235 and 99.3 grams of it will be uranium-238. Nuclear binding. Nuclear binding basically is nothing but the energy with which the nucleus is trying to bind all the neutrons and all the protons together inside it. So that is called as nuclear binding energy. When TNT is detonated, it undergoes a rapid chemical reaction, releasing a significant amount of energy in the form of shock wave and heat. This explosive property makes TNT valuable in applications where controlled explosions are required, such as demolitions and some military mutations. Will it be exposed due to uranium? No, it has nothing to do with uranium. That's a chemical reaction. This is a nuclear reaction. It's completely different. TNT is chemical based. It's not related to uranium at all. If you have no further questions, you can absolutely leave. That's fine. At the surface of the sun and other stars, the heat which is generated is because of nuclear fusion. Yes, that's correct. For formation of atomic bomb, which method is used? Uncontrolled chain reaction or enriched uranium? Both. Uncontrolled chain reaction with highly enriched uranium. Alpha decay. See, in case of alpha decay, what is happening is that you had a large number of protons. So some of the protons and neutrons, they are coming out of the matter, so that it can make it a bit more stable. How to make short notes in science and technology? A PPT is sufficient. I would say that PPT is sufficient. Whatever is required, it's already there, and all the additional information I'm giving, so that will comprehensively cover everything that is required. So try to upload one day prior to the class. It is used in printout and writing notes. Oh, that I understand. It's my problem because I take some time for clearing everything. Again, there are certain changes that I make just before the class. So after the class, I'll go back. I'll work on this PPT required for the next class. I'll make some changes here and there, and that making the change takes me some 5-6 hours sometimes. So that's why it takes time, and that's why just before the class I'm able to give you the PPT. because if I give it much more in advance, then I'll not be able to catch the essence of what I need to teach in the classroom. In beta decay, positrons are released. How is it done? It basically happens because of the internal rearrangement that happens between the protons and the neutrons. Because of that, we see that ultimately, to keep the entire balance of the atom and not only the nucleus, we see that there are extra particles that also release. For example, even neutrinos are released and positrons, and sometimes even electrons are released because of the stability factor. All right. So I think I've answered most of the questions here. Hydrogen bomb is not related to this. Fine. So let's end the session here. Please go back, revise over the weekend, try that whatever we have discussed here. You are doing a revision for all these things. And meanwhile, when we come back, we'll discuss about the remaining areas here, and we'll move on to our next chapter, which is biotechnology. So this is what we are going to do in the next class. Thank you very much.